This is Kevin Haroff, the current mayor of the city of Larkspur, and I will convene tonight's meeting. So I want to welcome everyone to the regular meeting of the Larkspur City Council. Today is Wednesday, October 6th, and we are starting on time at 6:30 or 6:31. As has been our practice for a long time, the meeting is being conducted on the internet. Ways to connect to the meeting are posted on the meeting agenda, which is also available in that way. So I welcome everyone who is attending tonight. And with that, let's get started with agenda item number 1, which is a roll call and a statement of the Pledge of Allegiance.
Councilmember Candell.
I am here.
Councilmember Paulson.
Here.
Councilmember Way.
Here.
Vice Mayor Helmer.
Here.
Mayor Haroff.
And I am here as well. So let's go forward with the Pledge of Allegiance. Our city manager has the flag flying. So I pledge allegiance
To the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation,
Under God.
under God, with
indivisible,
liberty
and
justice for all. Thank you. It always gives me great pleasure when we do that. So on to public comment, and we'll open it up to members of the public. This is an opportunity for those in the public to address the City Council regarding items that are not on the agenda or that are listed as part of the consent calendar, which we will get to shortly. If you can please state your name if you have comments to provide, and let us know where you live. We're going to be fairly strict tonight about time limits. So folks who have comments will have 3 minutes to provide their comments, and we will not be able to respond as a city council to anything that is brought up in that context. So with that, let's get started and see if there's anyone out there ready for public comment.
Our first comment will come from Brennan Wenk Riley.
Go ahead, Brennan.
Hi, how are you doing this evening?
Good.
Thank you for entertaining me this evening. I live in Larkspur. I am at the corner of Garden and William Way over in Heather Gardens. And I've put in a request to get parking permits for my residents. Because our address is on Garden Way, we do not qualify for parking permits on William Avenue. And I put together a document that I submitted to the council in order to hopefully get these permits. Our property is on the corner. Our driveway is on William Avenue. And about 60% of our property line is on William Avenue, while 40% of the property is on Garden. And unfortunately, there's no parking for us on Garden Avenue on our side of the street. And so William Avenue is our best avenue to access our property. But with the parking restrictions, it basically leaves us with virtually no parking. And so I'm just requesting parking permits be permitted for our address. And that's my request. And I've provided a document, and hopefully you guys have that in your hand that kind of outlines it a little bit better.
Yes, we do. Okay, thank you, Brandon. Appreciate that very much. And we'll give it a due consideration. Who's next in the queue?
Looking for any additional raised hands or emailed public comment. And there's no further public comment.
Okay. So we will then close the public comment period and proceed to agenda item number 3, presentations and proclamations. And I believe we have one on that list. So is this a Julian matter?
Whoops.
It is, yes, thank you.
There you
I'm
go.
going to share my screen. So good evening, Julian Skinner, Public Works Director for the City of Larkspur, and we have our Bonaire Bridge update for you tonight. We're getting close to the finish, so we may have one, maybe two more presentations to look forward to, but the end of the project is definitely in sight. Here's a fairly recent drone shot of the project site. Looking at the three components we have out there, at the bottom is the completed north half of the bridge, and then they're working on that middle section. That's the new south half of the bridge, and then the crane is sitting on the temporary trestle in this photo. So just a project recap. This project was awarded back in 2018 to Golden State Bridge. It's a 4-year contract based on a lot of the environmental constraints and the need to keep the bridge open during construction. The original contract award amount was $26.7 million. And the first day of work was May 23rd of 2018. Here's our tracking sheet that we show you at every update to share with you the progress of the work. And so the first item we look at is the time duration. That 4 years translates to 1,491 working days, or sorry, calendar days that they have to complete the project. And so this is as of August 31st. That's our last close of accounting period. And so as of that time, we were 80% of the way through the contract duration. 1,196 calendar days have been completed. The very bottom is we track how the construction costs are going. So essentially how much of the project work has been completed. And so we like to see this percentage ahead of the working days expired, which means that they've got more of the work done than time expired. So they've currently performed almost $23 million worth of the $26.7 million. So it's about 86% of the contract funds have been expended. The other thing we track is the change orders. These are for either things we've added into the project or for unforeseen conditions that have cropped up along the way and that we've had to pay money in addition to the base contract. Caltrans allows a 10% contingency allowance for the whole project. So we do track how we're burning through that money. And so far we're at about $798,000 of a $2.6 million allowance. So only 3% of the 10% has been expended. So good news so far on the budget front for the project. This is kind of our running schedule in a nutshell. That shows each of the major components of work and our progression through them. So all of the strikeouts in the first column are items that have been completed. And then we still have 3 substantial items to complete. We're currently working on the south bridge deck. Once that's complete, we'll be putting in the closure pour, which is basically joining the 2 halves of the bridge together. And then working on all the finish work, which is the approaches, the signals, traffic signals at each end of the bridge, along with the Bonaire Road between Magnolia and the bridge, various sidewalks and things like that. And then project completion in spring of next year. So we last did an update with you in spring of this year. And at that time, we were just completing what we call the substructure, which is basically everything on the bridge you don't see when it's finished, everything underneath the bridge deck. So on the top left here is the bent cap that basically supports the girders that the bridge deck sits on. And that's sitting on a pile that's 8 feet in diameter, about 100 feet down into the creek bed. And then the photo on the right is an aerial shot that shows the bridge construction at that time with the 4 bent caps next to the north half of the bridge. And so since the last update, what we've seen is we did do a 1-week closure in July, and this was to allow us to place the concrete girders on the north half of the bridge. So in this photo, you see the trucks that deliver the girder and the girder being lifted into place with the cranes. Here's a couple of close-up photos of that work in action. And then here's the drone shot of the completed girders. So again, this is kind of reverse of the orientation of the photo that was in the opening slide, but you have the north half of the bridge to the left, and then the 3 lines or the 3 girder lines for the new south half of the bridge. And then again, the trestle with the crane sitting on it. And so what they did after the girder placement was now they start forming up for the deck. So the deck is a concrete. And so you can see here in the kind of the middle of the photo is the 3 lines of the girders with all of the plywood and the form boards that go in so that they can place the deck concrete in that space. Here's a close-up kind of standing on one of the girders looking west here. So you can see the deck forms in between the girders to contain the concrete. And then you see all this purple reinforcing steel that's sticking up from the girders and from the bent caps. And so the next stage is going to be pouring the deck, but before they, before they do that, everything in this photo essentially needs to turn purple. There's going to be masses of this purple reinforcing steel that's going to cover all of the deck here, 2 layers of bridge reinforcing. And if I were to take this photo in a couple of weeks, you'd see nothing but purple here before they pour the concrete. This is a photo of them pouring the concrete deck from the north half of the bridge when they did that previously, and it'll be the same operation for the south half. And as we did for the north half of the bridge with the girders, it does, the girders, that was another 1-week closure for the south half of the girders. When we do the bridge deck pour, we'll have to do our 3rd and final bridge closure. Excuse me. This one is only a weekend closure as opposed to the 2 closures for installing the girders were a complete week. This is only a weekend, so tentatively scheduled for a couple of weeks out on Saturday, the 23rd, extending through Sunday. This date is still tentative as of this time. We've run into a material delivery, supply and delivery issue like a lot of construction projects have. The reason that the photo I showed you didn't have the purple steel in it yet was because there's been a delay in delivering the steel to the site. There's 3 total deliveries of steel that are needed in order to get the deck ready to pour. We've only got 1 of those delivered to date. The other 2 are en route and are supposed to be here in time that we can pour the deck on the date that we have shown here, but we're not going to be going out with official noticing until all the steel is on site and we can lock that date in. It is a complete bridge closure for the Saturday and Sunday as it was for the girders. So no vehicles will be allowed across the bridge when we're pouring the south deck, but we will keep the sidewalk open for peds. So for those that are interested, keep posted to the city website and we will update this closure date as soon as we know it. And then we are pushing out noticing to all our partners so that the hospital, the schools, everybody like that gets notice as soon as we can firm up this date. This is the overall project schedule, again, that we've been kind of showing along that highlights some of the constraints we have on the top. These are the environmental constraints. The arrow here kind of shows where we are. So right now we're in one of those small windows where we're allowed to be in the water and the ridgeway rail is not an issue. So we're hoping the steel all gets here so we can take advantage of this good construction window here to get everything ready for the bridge pour coming up. And then once we hit November 30th, we won't be allowed to be in the water anymore. So while we don't need to be in the water to pour the bridge deck, a lot of the form work and then the removing of the forms when the bridge is poured, that work needs to take place from the trestle. The trestle's in the water. And so we want to get all that work finished before November 30th so we can pull the trestle out of the creek this construction season. If we can't get the trestle out by November 30th, then we can't touch it again until June 15th of next year. And the project's supposed to finish in May. So definitely a crunch to try and meet that November 30th deadline to get the trestle out of the water. So upcoming, like I said, we'll have the bridge deck pour, and then you'll see them working on the approaches, and then probably January, most likely February, we'll be flopping traffic and pedestrians over to the south side of Bon Air. Right now, all the pedestrians are using the sidewalk on the north side of Bon Air Road, and you cannot cross over on the south side of the bridge. And the traffic obviously is on the north side, new north side of the bridge. But in February, we will make a flop and we'll do public notification of that too. We'll actually pull all the traffic over onto the new south side of the bridge, and we'll pull the pedestrians over there too. And then we'll work on the sidewalk and some of the railings on the north side of the bridge. And then, as I mentioned before, shooting for about a May of 2022 completion. So that's my quick update as to where we are and what's coming up in the next month or two. So I'm available for any questions that anybody may have.
Thank you, Julian. That was a terrific presentation and update. Very exciting to see the progress on this bridge. This is really, in my view, one of the most important and successful infrastructure projects that has been going on in Marin. And it's just great to see it getting close to conclusion. Are you pretty optimistic that we're going to meet that November 30th deadline before we can't be in the water again?
It's going to require all of the steel coming as is scheduled, and no real delays. As we get closer to that date, the contractor will have a decision to make. He knows how many days it takes to take the trestle out. So he will have a decision to make whether he wants to pull the trestle early to meet the November 30th deadline, and then some of the follow-up work that would have taken place from the trestle ordinarily will have to take place from the bridge deck, which is not as efficient and economical for him. But it may be a cost savings versus coming back in June of next year and having to pull the trestle out.
Oh, right.
So he has options, but he's definitely crunching all of his numbers and watching the calendar now to make sure that he's able to pull that trigger when he needs to determine if he wants to go ahead and pull the trestle before he's really ready to, but maybe incur some inefficiencies in the remainder of the work because he won't have the trestle to work from.
Well, I don't want to speak for others on the council, but do what you need to do, and if there are additional costs, keep us posted about that. But we're getting close to the end on this, and it's exciting to see. Any comments or questions from the council? I think I see Vice Mayor Helmer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Julian, I'm not going to jinx you by asking questions about whether you can stay exactly on schedule, but I do want to acknowledge that it looks like we're on track with respect to budget and contingency management. And I want to commend you on that, especially given the extenuating circumstances of the pandemic and the supply chain issues that have resulted. There may be a lag in how you're experiencing those things, but I hope not. Anyway, I want to thank you for all your work on the mayor has it right, and probably the most complex infrastructure project in Marin for some years. And I look forward to staying within budget and within schedule. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we have a construction management team that's been very responsive and very proactive, and looking ahead at the schedule and anticipating things that may come up and having plans in place, and a contractor who's been very willing and able to work with us and is interested in getting the project completed on time as we are, and has been working with us throughout this process. So we've definitely got the right team in place to keep this going in the right direction.
Great. I can't wait until we have the opening ceremony. Any other comments or questions from the council? Do we have, Allison, anyone from the public who would like to ask a question or make a comment?
I'm looking for any raised hands from our audience members or emailed public comment. And there's no public comment.
Okay, great. Well, then we will conclude that item and keep our fingers crossed that it all goes well, because I think it will. Let's move on to agenda item number 4, approval of the consent calendar. And before we actually ask for a motion to approve or to remove items, I want to invite our city attorney to make a preliminary statement.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let me just bring up my notes real quick. This is regarding item 4.4, which is the amendment to the city manager's employment agreement. State law was amended several years ago to require an oral report of a summary of proposed actions on salaries, salary schedules, or fringe benefits of executive level employees, including the city manager. Item 4.4 on the agenda tonight would approve an amendment to the city manager's employment agreement. The amendment would increase his base salary by 2.5%, which is consistent with adjustments for other regular employees. His base monthly salary would be $17,605. The amended contract would award him a bonus equal to 5% of base salary for achievement of goals that are established by the city council. And it would also provide additional personal leave equal to 5 days. No other changes are contemplated, and that summary satisfies the requirements of state law.
Okay, thank you, Sky. Any questions from the council on that statement? Anyone from the public who would like to comment?
Looking for any raised hands from our audience members or emailed public comment. And there's no public comment.
Okay, good, great. Well, I think that's great. Thanks very much, Sky. So let's move on to the overall consent calendar. And I would ask members of the council first if there are any items on the consent calendar that they would like to remove for separate consideration. And I think I saw Councilmember Paulson waving his hand.
No, nothing to remove.
Okay, anyone else? Seeing no one, let's see if there's anyone from the public who would like to remove an item from the consent calendar for separate consideration.
Looking for any raised hands from our audience members or emailed comments on the consent calendar. And there's no public comment.
Okay, good. Well, in that case, I will request a motion to approve the consent calendar.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, that's Councilmember Paulson and Candell. Let's have a vote.
Councilmember Candell,
Yes.
Councilmember Paulson,
Yes.
Councilmember Way,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Hilmer,
Yes.
Mayor Hara.
Yes, thank you. So that motion is approved and the consent calendar is adopted, which will close that item and move us on to item number 5, which is the city manager's oral report, in which case I will turn it over to our city manager, Dan Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. First, since you last met, the League of California Cities, which is now branding itself as Cal Cities, held its annual conference in Sacramento. And I was invited to participate on a panel at the conference about the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority. And just wanted to share with the council that what we all did has been noticed around the state. There were a healthy number of people there, a lot of questions. How do I export this into my community? And at one point, one of the people asked me about how it went at an individual jurisdiction and was it difficult? And I said, it wasn't difficult because we were committed, but it was complicated, that's for sure. And that's a testament to everybody. And I just wanted to let you know, folks are out there asking questions about what we've accomplished. Locally, along those lines, I wanted to share that Chief Martin from Central Marin Fire and Julian Skinner and I will be slowly engaging neighborhoods over the coming months, one at a time, to talk about how we can improve the parking situation on some of our narrower hillside streets so that we can all be confident that our emergency response vehicles can get through those neighborhoods quickly when there are emergencies that need an urgent response. And also so that if, God forbid, there's ever a need to evacuate, we know that we have safe routes for evacuation. So look for more in the coming weeks and months as we start to roll out those conversations. And it really will be a ground level, neighborhood by neighborhood discussion, because the solutions are going to be different in each area. And then lastly, your staff got together, the entire staff, for the first time in forever, pretty much. It feels like that anyway, to begin our journey to better understanding on issues of diversity, equity, and inclusivity. So we retained a firm called Circle Up Education, which is based in Oakland, and began our first session to explore issues and discuss common language so that we're all talking about these issues in the same way. It was an excellent training and very much well received by the staff. And I think all of the staff are looking forward to continuing this journey. So wanted to let you know, because I know that was a priority of the council at your last strategic planning discussion, that we invest time and resources in this area. That, Mr. Mayor, I'll turn it back to you and the council members.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Dan, and appreciate in particular your engagement with our larger community on the wildfire issues. And it's very comforting to hear that the others in the state are looking towards us as an example of how to address this issue, because I think we're playing a leadership role. And then just in addition, just wanted to compliment you and thank you for engaging with city staff on the diversity issues. As you know, that's been a priority of mine. I've been engaging with the county on that issue in a variety of different ways, and it's important for our city to show its own engagement as well. So I appreciate that call. So with that, any other comments or questions from the council members? Not seeing anybody. Allison, do we have anybody from the public?
I'm looking for any raised hands from our audience members or emailed comments. And there is no public comment.
Okay, well, that's good. Well, thank you again, Dan. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is council members' oral reports and comments. And I will invite members of the council to take this opportunity to provide a report if they wish. Let's see, Councilmember Way.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a few things since we've last met that I think are important to pass on. I'm our representative to the Community Development Agency, Housing and Federal Grants Division. And in September, we met twice. There's a lot of requests for money, and housing is a primary one. And we don't have a lot of money that comes in. It's about $785,000. At our first meeting, we really looked at the Coast Guard site for housing in West Marin, a HUD parcel for Vietnam veteran and workforce housing that's going to be in Novato area, and then Mill Street housing, which is a homeward bound project of Marin. We had a lot of presentations of a lot of different needs. Unfortunately, there's not a tremendous amount of money, but the second meeting, we spent time doing priority setting for what the county would like to prioritize, or this priority setting group for the next round of funding. There's still a lot of work to be done on that. The money comes in smaller amounts these days, and there's a large need for within the community of nonprofits who are serving the community. Second thing is, it relates to what the city manager said. I was our representative at the Cal Cities meeting in Sacramento 2 weeks ago. That's the first time they've met since the pandemic. It's usually about 4,000 city elected people from around the state. There were about 1,800 this year in person. And it was actually, I thought, for the limitations that we had, a very excellent conference. I'm not going to go through all the details of the ones I went to. The entire PowerPoints and presentations are online at the Cal Cities website if you're interested. But I'll just tell you some of the ones I attended. Human-centered design and why a city should care about it, which was a Southern California city that had gotten a Bloomberg grant. Got to look into those Bloomberg grants, because they were able to use a lot of money to redesign their websites. Tackling the housing crisis, the role of local leaders, a lot of conversation about housing, a lot of conversation about SB 9 and SB 10. Advancing equity, how old policies still impact cities. That was a fascinating history lesson about the redevelopment and redlining of Sacramento. And there's actually a documentary that I highly recommend, about a 30-minute documentary about how Sacramento was redlined in the 1950s. Roadmap to advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in a predominantly white affluent community. That was the title of another one. This was another excellent presentation by the city of San Luis Obispo. And I was going to refer you, Kevin, to it, because I think you'd find some of the work that they did there to be a really thoughtful way. They worked with the Cal Poly University and the student body there. Mm-hmm. And that's online too. Stories of the Census was the last one. Well, I also went to the wildfire protection presentation that Manager Schwartz talked about, and that was well received. And then the last one was a demographer and statistician really trying to share the information about the census. New data had just come out the day before, and we are losing a congressional seat in Southern California, which is the first time that's ever happened in California. But there's some really interesting new data that's coming out that I hope we can have a chance to look at as we're creating policy in Marin County. We're obviously a very slow growth county, but we did change. We did change slightly in Marin County. Lastly, the league changed its name. They rebranded to Cal Cities, and they're really trying to revitalize their website and make it more user-friendly for us who are elected individuals. One last thing is I'd like to thank the Madrone Canyon NRGs, particularly Peter Mazonas, for putting on that NRG First Responder Appreciation Picnic in the park a couple of Saturdays ago. That was very well attended by our law enforcement and fire, and a lot of NRG membership was there. So that's my report.
Great. Thank you very much, Catherine. And I would be very interested to hear in particular what information you got from San Luis Obispo on the issues that they've been addressing, because that's front and center for us here in Marin as well.
I'll pass it along, because it was a very cool process that they went through within their community that engaged hundreds and hundreds of people wanting to participate. They're a bigger city. They're 50 or they're 48,000 compared to us, but very similar demographic.
Right, and the issues are the same. So thank you for that. I think the next hand up was from Councilmember Paulson.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I wanted to just bring up two things to talk a little bit more about the fire, prevention efforts, and also about youth mental health. So on the fire prevention front, as both Councilmember Way and Manager Schwartz were saying there's been a lot of attention and a lot at the meetings. I had a couple of messages I wanted to convey. One is the tax money that we're spending, how that's being spent in helping Larkspur. So about 20% of Measure C money, which is a $20 million a year budget, comes right back to our city. And a lot of that is going towards vegetation management, specifically invasive vegetation like acacia and French broom, and some of the different species are being removed, or somehow the fuel load is being reduced. And then a lot of it is defensible space inspections, voluntary abatement program. And then lastly, the evacuation planning that's on our mind, with Madrone Canyon and also Blue Rock and some of the other highly at-risk neighborhoods. And so we have a high-tech platform in place, Zone Haven, which the police and fire staff are drilling on regularly. And right now they're also looking at what to do, sort of in the winter. And as Manager Schwartz said, the parking situation, clearing the roads. And the message, I'm on the MWPA board, really that we're getting is that a lot of this work is helping. So some of the lessons we've learned from, for example, the fire up in Lake Tahoe is that these fire breaks that they're trying to build, and they want to do a larger one in the greater Ross Valley, a shaded fuel break, they'll actually, save homes and save lives. They can take flame lengths and cut them from 150 feet to 15 feet. So it's something that, we know from the Fairfax fire, and we had one earlier in Corte Madera a month ago, that, the threat is very real and it's imminent. So, the steps are happening and we're moving as quickly as we can. And then for the public, there are really three things that people should do. One is we have a lot of leaves on the ground now. So if you can, spread the message to, try to get rid of leaves and any kind of, dead vegetation. And the saying is, where the leaves blow, where the leaves blow, the embers go. So it's something that, in this last month where the wind starts to pick up and we still have no rain is a really good step. Another is to, make sure you have alert marin. A lot of people have Nixle, but alert marin is specific to evacuation and what you need. And lastly, just, pause for a moment and think about what evacuation would look like. The main thing is these roads are, some of them are going to be jammed, and you just want to leave early. If there's any, sense of a fire, just leave early and carpool. So the more people that sit in one car, the less cars on the road. And that's the message that, the fire professionals have been trying to get out, and hopefully, we can take those steps and get through 2021. And then the other thing was I'm working with the Marin Youth Healthy Partnership, and we have a few more, like 8 or 9 more months until the funding runs out. And we're working pretty hard to get another 5 years of federal money to help the Marin youth with mental health issues, specifically around alcohol, tobacco, any substances, cannabis, and so forth. So I'm pretty enthusiastic. I tried to get a software platform for them to reach more membership, and working with fundraisers. And our former mayor, Larry Chu, is on that committee, and it's always great to see him. So more to be reported. And with that, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabe. That was very, very helpful and constructive. And the one thing that just kind of jumped out at me was clean out the leaves on your property. Because when they came around to do an inspection of my own home, that was the one of the things, and actually only 2 things that they pointed out, is to clean out the leaves, particularly those that are accumulating close to your home. That will be a real benefit to minimize fire risk. But otherwise, a terrific report. Anyone else on the council? I see Dan putting his thumb up, but I don't see him.
Oh, I was just going to echo your compliment to Gabe for a fantastic council member report.
Yeah, that was very good. Okay, anything else from others on the council? I just have a couple of things that I want to mention myself. The first one is tomorrow, MCE Clean Energy will be having its annual retreat online unfortunately, because we're still doing that. And it would be nice to see everybody, since we have such a large organization at this point, and to see them all in person, but we're going to do it online. And that's an opportunity for us to kind of regroup in terms of the success of the organization over the last year, as well as plans for the future. And the good news is MCE, notwithstanding the challenges that the pandemic has created for that enterprise, as well as every business enterprise in the state and the country, MCE has fared well. And its revenue streams are positive, its strategies are terrific, and it remains kind of the gold standard for community choice aggregation, not only in the state of California, but throughout the country. So I'm looking forward to that retreat. The second thing I just wanted to mention is I've gotten a lot of comments for months about the implementation of lighting on Sir Francis Drake, street lighting, as well as the traffic lights, but mostly the street lighting. A lot of consternation about how that process evolved, but the good news is we have been engaged in a process with the county and with Katie Rice's office in particular about those issues. And at least preliminarily, I've gotten some indication that the street lighting in the median strip on Sir Francis Drake, at least in the vicinity of the Bonnier Shopping Center, will be replaced. And it will be replaced with fixtures that I think are more traditional and consistent with the kind of fixtures that we've put into place in Larkspur, in the Bon Air Bridge and on Doherty Drive. And will be a real improvement and hopefully a benefit to the community who's expressed concerns about that. We're still having some conversations about the traffic lighting. There are probably less options there just because of safety and Caltrans restrictions. So, but it's a conversation we'll still have. Wanted to also mention Chamber of Commerce. Chamber of Commerce is doing well. We had a very successful wine stroll a couple of weeks ago. Catherine came by with her lovely daughter, and I appreciated that. But it was a big success, and the chamber made more out of it than I think anyone anticipated. I think everyone was just dying to have an opportunity to walk around the streets of Larkspur and grab a glass of wine and meet up with their neighbors in that context. So it was terrific, and I think is creating a good way of moving forward for the chamber. And in that note, I just wanted to mention that on October 26th, right before Halloween, the chamber is having its next general mixer, which it does from time to time and invites people to come and speak and make presentations. Our city manager and I have done one of those before. I'm not sure who's slated to do it this time, but I don't think anyone is really going to care because it's going to be at GOTS at Bon Air, and GOTS is providing food. So regardless of who shows up, that's an incentive to go. So please mark that down on your calendar, October 26th, 5:30 to 7 p.m. right before Halloween. So bring your Halloween outfits if you so choose. And then following up also on the comment that Catherine made about the issues that we're facing throughout the state of California on recognizing the challenges that we have all had on race and diversity. One of the conversations that I've been having with primarily with Supervisor Rice's office is the issue of restrictive covenants that often attach to the deeds and property interests that many of us have in the county. We're trying to go through a process right now to not only enlighten people about that history and the importance of understanding that those restrictive covenants may be on your own title, and that even though they are not legally enforceable, they're still there and it's a problem. So one of the things that I've been trying to pursue is working through a strategy with the county to develop a kind of almost a form additional statement that can be placed in your property title to acknowledge that those covenants have existed, and if you so choose, that you recognize that and disclaim it for the future, so that when you eventually go out to sell your property, which we all will end up doing at some point, that will be in your title and in the record, and people will be able to see that. And then finally, I just wanted to mention a reminder, we're in a drought. And there's been a lot of discussion about what the water district has been or has not been doing in order to address what it can address, which is limited with respect to the drought. They are, to my knowledge, expecting to move forward with the installation of a pipeline that will go across the San Rafael-Richmond Bridge. That construction, I think, would start in January and continue through the spring and be completed in the summer. The issue, of course, is a pipeline is great, but you need water to put in the pipeline. And water is limited in this state. So that's going to be an ongoing challenge for the district and for our community as a whole. And I only say that just to remind people that this is a complicated, tough issue, and the drought is one of the most critical challenges that we are facing as a community. The water district has so far imposed non-mandatory restrictions. I think they're moving away from that, which I think is a good thing. But regardless of what requirements are out there, people taking the drought seriously is critically important, because the access that we currently have to water resources going into the future is limited at best. And if we don't get a wet winter, we're going to be all in trouble next year. So please, please take it seriously. And that's the end of my comments. Are there any members of the public who want to weigh in here on things that we've said in this context?
I'm looking for any raised hands from our audience members or any emailed public comment. And there's no public comment.
Okay, good. Well, with that, we'll conclude that item and move on to item number 7, public hearings. And we have one item on that agenda, which is authorize an energy services contract for LED street lighting retrofit project with a potential award to a specific contractor. So can we have a staff report on that?
Yes, good evening, Julian Skinner, Public Works Director. So as mentioned, this is a public hearing item. So I'm going to have a brief presentation and then it'll be available for any council member questions. And then I'll ask the council to open up the public hearing portion of this item for public feedback. So the request tonight is to award a contract to Tanko Lighting for an LED retrofit of city streetlights. So there are approximately 770 streetlights that the city of Larkspur is responsible for on city streets. Most of the lights are high pressure sodium bulb. That was the default bulb for streetlights for quite some time. Back in 2012, there were some grants available, and PG&E also had some on-bill financing programs for energy conversion of streetlights, and some agencies in Marin participated and did a conversion project. The city of Larkspur did a small conversion project at that time. About 150 streetlights were converted to induction technology, which at the time was one of the two options, induction and light emitting diode, or LED, were the two energy efficient options for replacing high pressure sodium. And at that time, the city did undertake a small project, mainly in the commercial areas, industrial, Larkspur, Landing Circle, some on Magnolia. Some of those streetlights were converted, but we still have over 600 that are high pressure sodium. And since 2012, technology has changed quite a bit, and the LED, or the light emitting diode, is now the predominant technology in use today. And agencies across the US, across California, and across Marin are slowly retrofitting a lot of their streetlights to this new LED technology. There's primary two driving factors here. One is the LED streetlights use less electricity, so there's a cost savings involved. The city pays for the power for the streetlights on a monthly basis, and the LED lights use less power, and therefore our electric bills would go down. In addition to that, because they use less power, we're also reducing greenhouse gas emissions through this retrofit process. In addition to that, the maintenance costs of these fixtures are less than high pressure sodium, because these fixtures typically last quite a bit longer than high pressure sodium. So they have to be replaced and serviced less often. So that saves on our maintenance costs, which also helps to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We have less trucks going out there and servicing these lights. So as I mentioned, there were quite a few of these projects that were undertaken back in 2012 and since then. At that time, there were quite a few questions about this relatively new technology, the LED lights. And one of the issues back in 2012 was that to get the energy efficiency in the bulb, the light ended up being a different color than what folks were accustomed to. So this is a Kelvin chart that's shown here that basically is a measure of the temperature or the color of the light. And back in 2012, a lot of the fixtures that were being looked at and installed were in the 4,000 to 4,500 Kelvin range. And that was because at that time, with that technology, you needed the bulb to be at that temperature in order to get the energy efficiency and to have the cost savings. But the technology has increased over the years, and we're now able to get bulbs that are in the 3,000 Kelvin range for LED, which is very similar to what high pressure sodium is. So a lot of the earlier concerns of the different type of light that you get with an LED have been mitigated with the advancements in the technology of LED. It's advanced to the point where now you can get those energy savings with a 3,000 Kelvin bulb that you would have needed a 4,000 or a 4,500 for before. And this is important for a number of reasons. It's not just an aesthetic thing, the different color of light. It affects plants, it affects people. The wider the light is, or the higher the Kelvin is, it simulates daylight more. And so you'll have plants that will think the sun is out 24 hours a day and they will not grow how they're supposed to grow. And you'll also have people that have trouble sleeping at night if the street light out front is producing light that's similar to daylight. So it's not just a cost efficiency thing. It's important to get this Kelvin temperature down close to what folks are used to for street lighting. The other issue that people were complaining about with some of the early retrofit projects was because the LED is a smaller fixture and it's a more intense light at the actual source, there were concerns that it was going to wash more into people's houses and light up their houses more. But again, with advances in technology, they're better able now to focus that LED light. And so what you see here is a typical light distribution from a street light. The top is a typical high pressure sodium, which is like a light bulb. And so it radiates the light out in all directions. And so you can see here kind of the pattern that's shown here is everything below the head of the light is lit up. Whereas the LED technology is more of a focused light. Overall, it has less wattage, so it's putting out less light overall, but the light where it's needed on the street and on the sidewalk is similar to what it would be from a high pressure sodium bulb, but you don't get the wash because the LED bulb is more focused and it's able to point that light down where it's needed, and it doesn't wash so much out to the sides. And so the agencies that have gone through with these retrofits have actually found that the requirement for shielding on these lights is greatly reduced with the LED fixtures. So to combat what you see in the top photograph here, a street light sometimes is fitted with a shield that stops the light from getting to the home. They found that that need is less with the LEDs, and there's actually less wash from these fixtures than there would be from a traditional. And so the request tonight is to enter into a contract with Tanko Lighting. And so there is a portion of the government code that allows agencies to contract directly with a company for energy efficient projects and forego the public bidding process that you would normally have on a CIP project, say like the bridge or a paving project, where we put a set of contract documents together and we go out to bid. And one of the advantages to this is companies like Tanko Lighting are actually doing a turnkey project where one of the first tasks they'll do is they'll go out and they'll inventory every light I have, and then and then they'll be able to make a recommendation on what's the best matching LED fixture for that. If we were to do the traditional design it and then bid it and build it, we would have to do all that work in advance. And it's quite time consuming and costly to go and investigate every single street light with an engineer beforehand and then put a package together and to go out to bid. This is much more streamlined, and this is the way most agencies are doing their projects these days. So the town of Corte Madera is a few months ahead of us in this process, and they went through this a while ago, and they did seek costs for their system, which is very close in size to ours. And they arrived with Tanko is also being their low bidder based on the proposals that they got in. We sent out requests to 3 firms that we know do this, and Tanko were the only one that responded. And their price is similar per fixture to what they provided to town of Corte Madera. So we're confident that we have the best price and the best interest of the city with this proposal. Using this process does require the public hearing. That's why we're having the public hearing tonight, because we're not following the normal public contract code for such a contract. So this public hearing was noticed, and that's a process that's required in order to follow this section of the government code to award the contract. So talking a little bit about the efficiencies, here it is in a table. These numbers are preliminary at this time, and they vary a little bit for those of you that read through the packet and saw the proposal from Tanko. They made some assumptions because they haven't done the analysis of our streetlight network yet. But we've got some of the data from our PG&E bills and also from our streetlight maintenance contract. So we're able to drill down a little bit better on what we think the actual cost would be. And so we talk about our energy costs. These are annual costs. We're currently paying about $80,000 a year for power for our streetlights. We think with the streetlight conversion to LED will be about $50,000. So that's a savings of $30,000. And the maintenance should go from about $20,000 currently down to about $10,000. And so you can look at the bottom line here. The combination there shows a savings of about $40,000 a year. So with a capital outlay of the $285,000 that's in the Tanko proposal, we should recoup that $285,000 in about 7 years. And then from year 8 on, we're saving $40,000 a year. These numbers will all get tweaked and verified once we do the inventory and the analysis and we start mapping out exact LED replacement bulbs for the bulbs that we have out in the field. So depending on the wattage of some of the bulbs that we have, the LED wattages that are required to replace those, these numbers could go up or down. I would say probably about a 15% swing, maybe either way. So again, the contract that's contemplated now is turnkey. Basically, Tanko would go out and start their inventory. They would do a GIS audit of all 770 streetlights. They would verify that the streetlights that we have are what's in our database. And then they would map out an LED replacement fixture for each one of those HPS fixtures. There is a financing component that they offer, but we won't be pursuing this. It's funded in our capital improvement project program currently with gas tax. So we will be paying for these in today dollars and not incurring any interest charge or financing. We wouldn't be using that component of their program. And then they would work with those. They would commission all the lights to make sure they all work properly. We would work with PG&E to make sure that our bill was updated with the new inventory so that we were getting billed for the proper streetlights that we all had. And then they'll provide the final report for us and give us the final dollars and cents on savings and greenhouse gas emissions savings, reductions and things like that. So that's it for my presentation. I'm available for any questions. And as I mentioned, this is a public hearing, so I will ask that the mayor open up the public hearing at the conclusion of the council questions.
Kevin, you're muted.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm done. Can you hear me now? Hopefully. I can't stand this technology, but anyway, what I was saying was I just wanted to thank Julian for a very comprehensive presentation tonight, and also for a very thorough staff report for our consideration tonight, and also appreciate in the introductory paragraph the acknowledgement that these efforts are consistent with our commitment in our climate action plan and our relationship with MCE Clean Energy and commitment to utilizing their deep green energy program. All these things kind of fit together in a very nice way, and I think it's terrific. So thank you for that. And I'll open it up to comments from our council, and I see Vice Mayor Helmer's hand is up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Julian, thanks for a great presentation. You showed a couple of illustrative examples of fixtures. And I just want to make sure, given the mayor's comments earlier about the community reaction to light fixture replacement near the Bon Air Shopping Center on Sir Francis Drake, that we don't. I want to ask you, how can we ensure that what we're doing to replace existing fixtures minimizes the risk of a negative reaction from the community by taking into account the, as you laid out very carefully, the qualitative aspects of what we would look for in replacement fixtures, such as proper temperature and proper cutoff angle to shield the light. I say that because when the last high pressure sodium, I think, replacement took place, the result was less than optimal. And the fixtures that we put in near the bridge on Doherty, and what I saw in your last slide, the fixtures that are on the new Bon Air Bridge are more in keeping with those characteristics. So how can you ensure that we don't end up getting a negative reaction to the decisions made with regard to lighting design with this contract?
Yeah, so one of the important things to note is that what we're talking about is essentially a bulb replacement. I know a lot of back in 2012 when there were grants and there was on-bill financing, a lot of agencies took advantage of some of the funding that was available to either install bigger, brighter, higher lights in an effort to provide more lighting, kind of do a big comprehensive project. We're not proposing that at all. We're not. What you'll basically see is where there's an existing street light and a bulb, it'll be a one-for-one swap the bulb for a new bulb. We're not going to be making any of the fixtures higher.
I see.
Or anything like that. In fact, you know, for some time, I think as most folks know that have had a light bulb go out in their house and you go to the hardware store, it's hard to find the old bulbs. And a lot of replacement bulbs now in the home are LED. And that's similar to what we've experienced on with streetlight outages that have been occurring over time. We've been replacing when a streetlight goes out in the city of Larkspur, it's been replaced with an LED fixture. And it's seamless to most people. They don't realize from one day to the next, other than the light starts working again because we put a new LED fixture in. But this is similar to what most folks are seeing when they go to replace light bulbs in their home. And again, the technology has come a long way. You know, it used to be that LED lights weren't dimmable, and now they can be dimmable in the home. So, you know, ideally, this is going to be seamless. You know, I think the color temperature is the biggest thing that was noticed before, and now with the technology coming down, the bulb will look a lot more like what's out there today. I think for your standard, what we call Cobra head light, which is what you see in this photo, so your more kind of highway style lights that you have, like on Larkspur Landing Circle, East of Francis Drake, the visual will not really be noticeable in the fixture itself. I think if you look at some of the decorative lights we have on Doherty, you have on the bridge, you have the new LED style lights. And then as you get in front of the Rose Lane development, you have the last iteration of high pressure sodium before everybody switched to LED. And there's a slight difference. It's still an acorn type light. But one of the differences is that in the LED fixture, the light's actually on top and it shines down as opposed to a bulb that radiates out. So I think in your not so standard lights, you may perceive a little bit of a aesthetic difference in the actual light housing itself. And most of the ones where it's the standard Cobra head, like in this photo here, the average person is not gonna know from one day to the next that it's an LED fixture versus a high pressure sodium.
But am I understanding you to say that in the Acorn Street fixtures, the ones that are in the Rose Lane development, for example, there'll be an improvement with those lamp replacements, just in terms of color and angle of.
Correct. Yeah. Well, there are a few different retrofit models out there. And so part of the analysis that the contractor will do is they will look at where the fixture is, how high it is above the ground, what the current wattage is, and then they will map that to a fixture that is as close as possible light-wise to what is there now. So it may be, for example, that a decorative fixture in downtown Magnolia ends up being slightly different than the decorative fixture over on Doherty because of where they are and what's in the area and how high the bulb is and everything like that. But we'll get an opportunity to review all that and the recommendations from the contractor before anything actually gets changed out in the field.
Well, what I'm saying is many of the things that were replaced as high pressure sodium before now produce way too much glare. If there's anything we can do to improve on that lighting design characteristic would be helpful.
Yeah, in theory, the LED is superior to the HPS in that faction. There may be the odd 1 in 100 installation based on the actual location of the bulb, where the LED is not optimal, but they do make shields so that whatever we do, it will not be worse than what's out there now, and I suspect most of them will end up being better.
Well, I would just request, if it's possible, to have, as part of the inventory assessment, to have them look at the lighting at night. And you'll see that many of the street fixtures, especially the more simple street light, the acorn design, as you say, are very glaring. And that's been a problem since they were replaced the last time. And I would hate to see an opportunity wasted where we can't improve on that.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
And thanks, Dan, for that. And just to clarify my comments before about what's being contemplated on Sir Francis Drake, I think it's largely consistent in terms of the actual lighting aspects to what Julian is suggesting for the city of Larkspur here. Mostly what the issues have been, although there's been some of the wash issues that have affected people who live in close proximity to Sir Francis Drake. That will be addressed, I believe, in that project. But primarily, it's a response to concerns about the aesthetic of the light poles that have been put in on Sir Francis Drake. And I think the county has heard that concern, and hopefully we're in a path to replace those newly installed lighting poles with something that is more consistent with what we have in the city and is more appealing to our community.
And through the mayor, I just want to say, Julian, this was no criticism of you. I understand all you're doing, and I'm very grateful for everything and your thoroughness and ability to handle all these complex things. The situation I was describing was something that took place several public works directors ago, and I've been hoping for an opportunity all these years to take advantage of a replacement opportunity. So appreciate your patience.
And now you're getting it. So Councilmember Paulson.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, just a few brief comments and questions. Julian, I want to thank you for really thorough presentation. And I also feel like the 25 public audience members attending, that even though we're spending so much time on lighting, it is an important quality of life issue. I feel really supportive, and I think I feel supportive, for 3 reasons. And I thought I would just see if they're correct, Julian. Your report was thorough, but I want to be sure. One thing is, I think this would increase safety because, as I understand it, the new LED bulbs with the broader spectrum actually allow you to see better. So people who can't see red versus green, for example, traffic lights or vests or whatever, they would have a better chance to see that now. So that's one assumption maybe you can validate. The second is both the power savings to our budget, which I think is $40,000 a year, and obviously the climate, savings of having less energy reduction. Those are fairly significant. You stated them. And then, kind of the third and last assumption is a little bit what Councilmember Hilmer was getting into was, the quality of light at night, the dark sky compliance to the ambiance. And, I have looked at Doherty and I have looked at Rose, and it does seem to be the directional lighting and, the better use of spectrum would reduce that very irritating light that we sometimes see out of our bedroom windows at night. Like we have in my house 2 lights, which just kind of glare, that yellowish glare all night long. And my assumption is that would basically be reduced or go away. So maybe you can just, let me know if those are 3 correct assumptions.
Yeah, so the first point, I'm not an expert on that, but yes, I've definitely seen that in the literature, and we can follow up and provide more information on that. As far as a safety enhancement, we do consider it a safety enhancement, and I want to be careful to make sure that folks don't interpret that as being brighter light. We're not saying these lights are going to be brighter, but they will better focus the light where it's needed on the street and the sidewalks. The other safety factor is that these bulbs are way more reliable than the traditional high pressure sodium. And so there's less of a chance of the lights burning out and not being on at night. And then, yes, all the fixtures that we install will be dark sky compliant. That's part of what we're looking at too, and that the 3000 Kelvin threshold is what's recommended by the dark sky. I think it's called Dark Sky Alliance, and then also the American Medical Association to make sure that we don't have daylight type lights out there. They also recommend the 3000 Kelvin or less.
Okay, thank you for that response. Any other comments or questions from the council?
Yeah, I just have one, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, good. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, Jillian, great report. Just a quick question was, I'm surprised that there are no either federal or state incentives to do this, as it seems that both state and federal governments would want us to make this change. And I'm sure that you've looked into it and staff has looked into it. I just want to double check and make sure there's nothing out there that we're missing.
Yeah, there are not currently. There have been in the past. As I mentioned, 2012, there was a big push. There were lots of California Energy Commission grants out there, and then PG&E themselves had some programs for on-bill financing to try and incentivize the switch. But this is something that community after community is doing now based on the greenhouse gas reduction and the energy and the cost savings. And so I suspect there's no grants out there now because there's not really, the incentive is not really needed through grants. Most communities are undertaking these projects themselves because of all of the benefits. There are definitely very low interest loan options out there, but there's not currently any grants that would match our project requirement exactly.
All right, thank you.
Good, thanks for that. Anything else from the council? Let's see if there's anyone from the public who would like to comment or ask questions.
The first comment will come from Robin Mahler.
Okay, Robin, go ahead.
Good evening, Mayor Haroff, council members and staff. This is actually David Mahler calling in from Larkspur.
Sorry, we've gotten that mixed up in the past, but you always show up that way.
Yeah, it shows up as Robin. And I actually was on the meeting tonight for other agenda items, but I want to say I'm really glad to see this project moving ahead. You know, it saves energy, lowers costs, and especially reduces greenhouse gas emissions. It sounds like it's a win-win-win. And what I wanted to share is I really think a key issue from the public perspective here is the color of the light emitted. And it's noted in the staff report, and Director Skinner touched on this a little bit as well, that LED lighting, you know, can be all over the spectrum, but it certainly can have warm color light. I note in the staff report, it says that the city anticipates using 3000 K bulbs, which do emit a warm color light. I think that sounds great. I'd just like to support the city proceeding with award of the contract, but making a strong commitment that the LED bulbs that would be used would be warm color light emitting bulbs. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, David.
Our next comment will come from caller ending 1402.
James Holmes, Larkspur. I too echo Mr. Mahler's comments. My primary concern was with the maintenance of what the staff report accurately describes as, quote, the warm yellow hues, unquote, of current lights. And it does seem like that is going to be maintained. If indeed, I've called in a few light changes, dead street lights in the last 6 months or so, and I've if indeed they've been replacing them with LED lights, indeed the color of the replaced light has been essentially the same as the other one, as the previous one that died. But in any event, I echo Mr. Muller's desire to maintain the color status quo as much as possible. I would note that while understanding that the wash can be troublesome in most areas, in certain heavily wooded areas, such as my street, a certain amount of wash is a good idea because it is so heavily wooded. Indeed, the sidewalk might not even be adjacent to the street. So in heavily wooded areas, elimination of light wash is probably should not be a major concern. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, James. Anyone else in the public queue?
I do see Robin Mahler in our queue again. I just want to make sure this is a new speaker. Robin Mahler, you may unmute yourself.
I think he just left his hand up still. And that was David.
Okay. Okay, that may be the case. I'll lower their hand, and then I'm looking for any additional raised hands or any emailed public comment. And there is no public comment.
Okay. All right. Well, then let's bring it back to the council, and one last opportunity to make comments or questions on this. Otherwise, I'll ask for a motion to approve the proposed resolution.
Hilmer moves.
Dan Hilmer, our Race Meyer, has moved
second that.
resolution, and Catherine Way has given us a second. So this is resolution 5421. And I think that's the only action that we need to take, if I'm not mistaken, which is just to approve the resolution, which authorizes entering into the contract with Tanko Lighting. So with that, I'll call for a motion. I'm sorry, we've got a motion. We'll call for a vote.
Councilmember Kendall,
Yes.
Councilmember Paulson,
Yes.
Councilmember Way,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Hilmer,
Yes.
Mayor Harrell.
Yes. And with that, the motion is approved. Thank you all. And that will conclude agenda item 7.1, and we'll move on to business items, of which we have several. And we will start with 8.1, which is adding a Vision Larkspur in 2030 preface to the city's climate action plan. So if we could have a staff report on that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. At a prior meeting, the council reviewed a submission from David Muller that was proposed to be a statement to put in the opening of your climate action plan. And the council, after reviewing it, directed staff to revise it to sort of reflect some of the feedback that the council had given us, and to give some consideration to some broader context for the city. So we took a stab at that and have provided you with a revised copy for your consideration this evening. If you approve it, then we will insert it appropriately within the production copy of the climate action plan.
And that the revised vision statement is included in the staff report at attachment 1 to this agenda item. That's what you're proposing.
That's correct.
Okay, good. Well, thank you. Any questions from the council? I think Vice Mayor Hilmer is raising his hand.
Dan, could you briefly address if you've read the public comment citing some differences. I think the public comment was from Mr. Mahler, citing some differences between what he intended and what is proposed tonight. Could you, and I'm happy to talk about it too, but I thought you might be able to address that, those distinctions better and more quickly.
Okay. Mr. Mueller submitted an email that has a number of bullet points. So would you like me to just briefly go over the bullet points?
Sure.
So the first statement is a bullet point about social equity. I'll leave it up to the council if the council wants to make that statement. I wasn't confident that the nexus is clear between the Larkspur Climate Action Plan and the social equity statement, so I didn't include it. Reinsert a reference to residents replacing their gas appliances with electric models unrelated to remodeling. We were trying to write a sentence, or I was trying to write a sentence that sort of reflected the standard sort of approach that Larkspur takes to moving the community toward change. And if you want to include this statement, then you just be sort of implying that your vision and look back was a little more aggressive than staff suggestion. Reinsert a reference about residents feeling knowledgeable and empowered about climate change. I'll just leave that up to the council if you want to add that sentence.
Okay, well, I think probably worth hearing from the council. I appreciate your summarizing those things. Thanks.
Okay, good. Well, thanks for that question. Anything else from the council on this before we open it up to the public? And I see Councilmember Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick question to the city manager. I think we brought this up at the prior meeting. Do you see any, well, let me preface my question. I believe the Climate Action Plan is our policy document, and we've voted to implement that. Do you see any contradictions or any problems between having the vision statements as written in the staff report, that it would possibly make some of the Climate Action Plan direction ambiguous or would go against it? Thank you.
I don't think it will affect the policy portions of the document.
And again, the council member is correct. The policy document is the document that really provides us with the direction. The vision statement is helpful, but it's not the same thing. Councilmember Whale.
Thanks for that explanation, Dan. I crafting a document like this is always cumbersome when it's a lot of different thoughts and trying to draft a document with community input in the manner in which we've had to do it with this pandemic. I know it's been difficult for all of us. I think you're explaining the reason why those three elements weren't in there is sufficient for me in many ways. I think we could continue to engage staff on this matter over and over and over again until we splice and word dice a document. I'm pretty comfortable with what it looks like now, because I think it's true that it's really the meats of the bones of the project is in the actual resolution and in the actual working document, as opposed to the paragraph opening statement. So I'd like to hear from others, but I'm comfortable that what we're putting forward is really our philosophy. I'm not really comfortable putting in about replacing gas appliances with electric, although that may be our long range plans. I think that puts out a direction in puts out a statement in writing that we have yet to have further discussion about, or fleshing out whether that's an appropriate avenue for us to go through. So just putting that out there for now. I'd like to hear what others have to say. And I also really appreciate the engagement with our community. It continues to be led by the Larkspur Climate Group. And I know many of them are here. So thank you for continuing to engage with us on this.
Thank you, Councilmember Way. And just a footnote to your comment about the transition from gas to electric appliances. That is an issue that is up front and center currently with proposals from the California Energy Commission to accomplish that goal exactly through the building code. And that's a process that we are starting to learn more about. And I think it's important for us to see how that process goes forward, because it would be applied not just in the city of Larkspur, but on a statewide basis. Any other comments from the council? Vice Mayor Helmer.
I understand what the city manager is saying. I understand what the council members' comments. I understand what they're all saying. I'm thinking about the public comment and the inclusion of issues that exist. We all, I think, acknowledge that social equity and environmental justice issues exist, even though we may lack resources or not, when our focused programs may not seem like they're addressing those issues. I think those issues still exist. I think empowering people to take responsibility for their own part in addressing climate change and adaptation and the things we're trying to encourage them to do, I think that's an important thing to include, regardless of whether it's staff or our messaging to the public. If in the future trends are going to lead toward further reductions in greenhouse gas by building codes requiring or prohibiting gas appliances, whether or not we have adopted those ordinances, if we see those things coming in the form of legislation or trends, I think there's a way to at least include the mention of that possibility as if at worst a warning that we may have to consider these things. I think all this is valuable information, even if we don't have direct policy implementation as yet. So I think in a vision statement, I think looking forward and identifying things that are going to become more important and more imminent for us to deal with. I think that's what those three things represent to me. And I'd like to hear from the council members if they think that creatively describing these things and whatever status that issue has at this moment is worth reflecting in a forward paragraph for the climate action plan.
Okay. Well, I think Councilmember Way has already expressed her view on that subject. Any other members of the council want to say something? Councilmember Paulson.
Yeah, I feel, as a general position, of the community and myself, and what Vice Mayor Helmer said, prioritizing climate action is very, I appreciate what the citizen group has done, and I'm, fully behind it. My chief concern is that we don't, create contradictions in our documents. And I think that addresses that concern was addressed. But yes, I think that to the extent that we can be proactive and flexible, I'm fully behind that.
And I appreciate that, and I think that nothing we do tonight precludes us from moving forward on other related issues of social equity and anything. This is a vision statement for a climate action plan, and I personally think that staff has done a good job in capturing what may be appropriate, consistent with what we've already decided.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I would just ask that if we're not having policy connections in the vision statement, at least acknowledge the issues that exist.
I think we have. I think that absolutely valid, and I think we have done that. And I think there are plenty of opportunities for us to continue to work on that. Now, I mean, you know me well enough to know that I'm very committed to those issues, or addressing those issues. Anything else from the council? Seeing nothing, we'll open up to the public.
I'm looking for any raised hands from audience members. Our first speaker is caller ending 1402.
Go ahead. I think that's James again.
James Holmes, yes. I wasn't sure what the legal status of this statement was and how it affected the Larkspur, how this Larkspur unique provision would affect the interpretation of this otherwise generally uniform countywide policy. But if indeed it's understood to be precatory only and not changing the policy, I mean, I guess that's the response to that. However, if you do add it, I would like to follow up on Ms. Way's reference regarding the electrification. According to the staff report, one of the objectives of the staff rewrite was to avoid the impression that the council had predetermined any specific issue. But the electrification provision, which is the third paragraph, last sentence, seems to say that or indicate that the council has predetermined that electrification should in fact be mandated. That seems to be the thrust of that. So I think if the objective is to avoid the impression of predetermination, then that statement should be eliminated or softened. If you do want to keep the statement, then I would recommend inserting after the word regulation, which is how the sentence begins, an additional phrase that says a more reliable power grid, because the plan recognizes in its exposition that is a very important aspect for electrification. Thank you.
Yep, thank you for that.
The next comment will come from David Mahler.
There you go. Not Robin, David.
Great. Probably showed up as Robin though. Well, greetings again. First of all, I want to start by really thanking the council for adding a vision of Larkspur in 2030 to the climate action plan. I really feel strongly, as does the whole Larkspur climate group, that this will help engage residents in taking the actions identified in the CAP. So really appreciate that, and appreciate what staff has worked up here. It closely tracks the original version. We just had a few comments on it. But I want to speak to a couple of things that have come up in the discussion, just right here. First of all, the one about something in there, putting something in the story about to reflect social equity. And I think Councilmember Way asked a question about, or actually it was City Manager Schwartz responding about, is social equity reflected in the CAP? Should there be something in here? And I'd like to point out there's a whole section in the CAP specific to social equity. So I think it would be very appropriate in this story to have something that reflects what that chapter says. On the section or the recommended addition about the appliances, it's not a huge thing, except that I'd like to point out gas use in home appliances is our second biggest emitter of greenhouse gases in Larkspur. This is supposed to be a vision of what things might look like 9 years from now. It doesn't say this stuff will happen. It says it might happen. And it's hard for me to think we're going to avoid our second biggest emission source of greenhouse gases in a vision of what the future might look like. But the one that I think is most important is the last one about residents feeling knowledgeable and empowered, because you all read the cap, you all know what it says, and it says that 90% of the greenhouse gas emission reductions in Larkspur over the next 9 years needs to come from actions of Larkspur's residents. If Larkspur's residents don't feel knowledgeable and empowered, it isn't going to happen. So of all these three comments, I would really urge that that one be put in. And one other thing that came up in the dialogue here that just really hit me when I looked at it again, this whole issue about, is the council making some commitment of what the future will look like? I want to add one additional recommendation. In the first paragraph, last sentence, it currently reads, to help get us there, we offer this vision of Larkspur in 2030. Maybe we should change that to say, we offer this vision of what Larkspur may look like or might look like in 2030, to take out any sort of implication that this is going to be what it looks like, that the council's making any commitment to any particular policy other than what's in the cap. So I think having that, what it might look like in 2030 does not diminish the story and could potentially remove any concern about, is the council overcommitting to any particular outcome? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for that.
The next comment will come from Max Pere.
Okay.
Greetings, Mayor Haroff, members of the Larkspur City Council. I submitted a letter on behalf of the next item on the agenda, the climate emergency resolution, but I did just want to weigh in on the discussion, the really good discussion you're having in regards to whether equity deserves a place in the vision statement for the CAP. I'm representing the Redwood Community Health Coalition, which is a coalition of community health centers across 4 counties, including Marin County, with 233,000 patients each year. Some of our Marin members include Marin Community Clinics, Ritter Center, Marin City Health and Wellness, and Coastal Health Alliance in West Marin. And of course, Marin Community Clinics does have a Green Bay site. We've seen with our patients, as well as our staff, a lot of added stress and concern in regards to emergency scenarios and climate disasters over the past several years. And the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has rightly identified climate change as a human-made health stressor, which influences health and disease due to the frequency and severity of natural disasters such as wildfires, flooding, sea level rise, infectious disease, and increased behavioral health challenges. And as we've discussed, and I think the climate group in Larkspur has brought to the forefront, climate change intersects with multiple social determinants of health impacting patients. And that includes a number of social equity issues, including transit, sustainable water supplies, clean air, affordable and safe housing conditions. And over the last year and a half, of course, our country and locally in Larkspur and around Marin, we've had in many ways a racial reckoning, recognizing our systems and institutions have disproportionately affected lower income residents and communities of color. And with climate change, I think we'll see these inequities exacerbated, including locally. Many of our frontline communities in Marin are located on the front lines of sea level rise. So meeting this challenge will take all of us, and I just wanted to thank you for your consideration of making equity front and center by including it in the vision document. Thanks.
Thank you, Max.
The next comment will come from Marilyn Price.
Marilyn?
Yes, hi. I actually live in Mill Valley here, and I do want to echo what David said. This has been my pet project since I've been involved in climate for years and years, and a lot since 2017. I do feel we need to reach our citizens. Any little sentence you can add that might engage somebody else. One person leads to 2 to 3 to 4, the rippling effect. So I echo David's thought there and his other thoughts too. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. Appreciate that. Who's next?
Looking for any additional raised hands. The council did receive an email public comment. This came in regarding both items 8.1 and 8.2 on the agenda regarding climate. I'll read it now. This is from Tom Flynn. Dear council members, as a member of the Larkspur Climate Group, thank you for supporting adoption of the CER. The British Medical Journal recently reported on an international survey indicating that the psychological burdens of climate crisis were profoundly affecting huge numbers of these young people around the world. According to the UN, despite our hopes that things might be improving, by 2030 carbon emissions are expected to rise by 16% rather than fall by half, which is needed to keep global heating under the internationally agreed limit of 1.5 C. Climate change is an extremely urgent matter that needs top priority in all significant City Council considerations. Please reinsert statement regarding the need for urgent action into the CER and that the Council will elevate climate issues to be a high priority in its annual planning process and will join and advocate for a nationwide call for climate mobilization efforts. We can and must do our part. And I'm looking for any further raised hands or emailed comments. And there's no further public comment.
Okay, thanks, Allison. So with that, I'll bring it back to the council for any additional discussion or action on this item. And I think the action is just simply for the city council to provide direction to staff about whether to attach the preface that has been prepared and submitted, or whether there is a consensus on making changes. Councilmember Candell.
Yeah, I just wanted to voice, I agree with everything the public speakers were saying. And I just want to run it by staff to see if adopting these changes have any legal consequences that, I mean, I know you made changes for a reason. Were they reasons that would legally affect the document, or were it more philosophical that we didn't want to, we wanted to rein in our expectations maybe?
Mostly we were trying to avoid predetermined policy by the council, and a lot of the original draft suggested policy decisions on the part of the council. So we were just trying to cut those out. There were a couple of sentences in the original draft that, when you stepped back and thought about them, sort of suggested that we were celebrating outcomes that weren't universally popular. So I didn't think you necessarily wanted those in there either. But this doesn't affect policy at all. This is, it's just a statement. So you can put whatever you feel comfortable in there.
But just in that regard, Dan, even though it is a non-binding policy or not binding on policy, it does create expectations. And I personally think that you've done a terrific job in accommodating those expectations within the framework of the policy that we have adopted. So it would be my hope that we would go forward and adopt the language that has been included in the staff report. Any other comments from the council? Councilmember Paulson.
Yeah, I'm prepared to move that we pass the resolution.
Well, it's not a resolution, right? So we just need do we need anything further than just a consensus on direction to incorporate this, Dan?
I think we were looking for a vote that you wanted this added to the cap, and I don't know if you want to entertain any adjustments or amendments to what was presented to you.
Okay. Well, I think given that, I think Councilmember Paulson has actually presented us with a motion to adopt this language. Is that correct?
Yes.
I see him nodding. Do we have a second? I'll be happy to second it.
And I'm sorry, can I just get a clarification? This is the language from the staff report, is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
So we have a motion and we have a second. Let's have a vote.
Councilmember Candell,
Yes.
Councilmember Paulson,
Yes.
Councilmember Way,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Hilmer,
Yes.
Mayor Hara.
Yes. So great. So we've addressed that and appreciate everyone's participation and involvement in the conversation. It's been a helpful one, not just this evening, but over time as we've gotten to the point where we are in moving forward with this. It's important, I think, to not only us on the council, but everyone in our community. So with that, I think we will conclude 8.1 and move to 8.2, which is consideration of a declaration of a climate emergency. And so can you have a staff report on that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. The council at its regular meeting on June 16 reviewed a submission from a resident, David Muller, to consider adopting a submitted resolution declaring a climate emergency. The council put that request on its July 21st meeting agenda, held a discussion on the proposal, had requests from the staff that the staff review the preamble and review the operative clauses relative to city policy and practices. Staff did so, brought back the revised resolution that's before you. I should note, I didn't put it in the staff report, that San Rafael passed one of these types of resolutions at a recent meeting, and we had access to that when we were doing our revision. So that was actually helpful. And we were able to make a few late updates to make sure, particularly in the preamble, that the statements were updated to the latest information. The decision or consideration before the council now is to adopt the revised resolution presented by staff. You can adopt the resolution submitted by Mr. Muller, or you could choose not to adopt a resolution. And with that, I turn it back to the council.
Okay, thank you for that. And so we have a proposed resolution that'll be 5521 that has been prepared by staff, and we have some options as well. So let me open it up to the council for any comments or questions. Seeing none, let's open it up to the public.
The first comment will come from David Muller.
Okay, go ahead, David.
Thank you. Similar to the last item, I want to start by really thanking the council and the staff for support of adoption of a climate emergency resolution. As City Manager Schwartz said, since the time of the July 21st meeting, San Rafael has adopted a similar resolution. So that means if Larkspur moves ahead with this, it'll be the 8th of the 12 Marin County jurisdictions to adopt, and we all look forward to that. Dan referred to some changes that came out of the review of the San Rafael, and we think the whereases as they stand right now, the preambles, looks great. We do have some concerns about some changes that were made to the resolutions themselves, the be it resolved parts. I submitted on behalf of the Larkspur Climate Group an email that outlined these in detail. I want to touch on each of them in a very brief way. In the first resolution, for some reason, the term or the concept that urgent action was needed was deleted. And we don't know why that would have happened. The statement, the first resolution starts that we have a climate emergency, and the statement that urgent action is needed just seems like a natural companion that we are in a climate emergency. So we would recommend putting that in, back in, reinserting the need for urgent action. In the fifth resolution, and I'm referring to the resolution as appears in the staff report, the staff made a change. It's a pretty big change, at least as we're reading it. The intent was that staff would include a consideration of consistency with Larkspur's climate action plan in all relevant staff reports. And that same provision appears in many other climate emergency resolutions, including Corte Maderas, which was a major sample for here, and I believe it's in San Rafael's as well. And somehow it's been rewritten now that it seems to say that the staff will consider that, as it usually does, but it makes no mention of bringing the results of that consideration forward in the staff report presented to the council and the public. So if the intent is that this consideration of consistency with the cap is just something staff will do as routine and never bring that consideration forward, did it do it? What were the results of that consideration? It seems like it's a real miss by not presenting that to the public as well as to the council. So we would recommend reinserting the original wording, which, as I said, matches Corte Maderas, that consideration of consistency with the cap be part of all relevant staff reports. Our final two comments are there were two elements in the draft resolution that the Larkspur Climate Group presented that have been deleted from the draft that the staff put out. The first was that the council would elevate climate issues to be a high priority in its annual planning process. We think this should be reinserted. In the staff report the first time around, it noted if the council chose to do that, it would be the only issue that would have that kind of designation to be a high priority. But that's exactly what's trying to be accomplished with the CER, is to make climate issues a high priority. So why that would be deleted is a little beyond us. And then the final resolution that was omitted was that a resolution that Larkspur joins and will advocate for a nationwide call for climate mobilization efforts. Again, we're a little baffled why this would be deleted. In adopting a CER, Larkspur will be joining others in that regard about climate actions. This exact provision appears in Corte Madera's CER as written in our proposal. So we are really a little baffled why both of those last two resolutions were completely deleted from the staff's rework. So those are our comments. And again, we're just absolutely delighted with the council's embrace of moving ahead and adopting a CER. We think it's the right thing to do, but we think there are a few provisions in the reworking by staff that went beyond the 4 bullets that they identified back at the July 21st meeting, and that we would recommend be reinserted in the draft that is approved by the council tonight. Thanks so much.
Thanks, David. Anyone else in the public?
Next, we'll hear from James Holmes.
James?
James Holmes. I still continue to have certain misgivings about the resolution, not so much as to its content, but being styled as a declaration of emergency, because I really don't think climate change meets the definition of the dictionary definition of an emergency being a sudden and unexpected occurrence. This is, as the resolution itself makes clear, this is it's not sudden, it's ongoing, and it certainly isn't unexpected. It's very much expected. So that aside, so I would like to see the resolution passed, but not styled as a declaration of emergency, but perhaps as a commitment to action or something similar. But aside from that, I too focused on the same paragraph that Mr. Moeller mentioned regarding consideration of the cap, and it's the paragraph in draft 5521, the third paragraph it's the next to last resolved paragraph, which says that the city manager and staff shall consider consistency with the cap. It seems to me that if the cap is going to be operative on all city boards and commissions, then the resolved paragraph should say that the cap shall be considered by all relevant city boards and commissions. I mean, it may be more relevant to some than the others. It may not be relevant to Measure B, but anyway, it does seem to me that the cap should be part of the consideration for all city boards and commissions, and that the resolution should be, the resolved paragraph could be expanded to state that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, James. Anyone else in the public? Ken Strong?
Thanks, Liz.
Hi, this is Ken Strong, and I live in Greenbrae. And I would echo the comments Mr. Mueller made concerning some of the paragraphs, but I think particularly I would just emphasize the fact that I think the language that this matter is urgent is important to have in there. If it's going to be called a climate emergency resolution, it begs, I don't know how it cannot be deemed to be an urgent issue. And I think that making sure that the staff, when they do take the cap policies into consideration, that they report in their staff report how they evaluated those issues is an important add. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. And Max Perry.
Hello, good evening again. Max Perret, Mill Valley, speaking on behalf of the Redwood Community Health Coalition, Marin Community Clinics and Ritter Center. Just want to reiterate a couple of the points that David Moeller of the Larkspur Climate Group made. I think the urgency of the issue is apparent, and I think that that's actually why we're passing these climate emergency resolutions. So hopefully that can be added back in. And then also just wanted to thank you for all of your work and the staff's work on this resolution. When we started this work about a year and a half ago, only 2 communities in Marin had passed it. And now after you guys take this action tonight, it'll be 8. And that's not including the Golden Gate Bridge District and many other communities outside of Marin County. All 9 jurisdictions in Sonoma County have passed CERs, as well as the County of Sonoma, and many other Bay Area counties have as well. So just want to thank you, and hopefully we can emphasize the urgency of the issue and the high importance placed on climate in further actions taken by the council. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Max.
Next will be Jack Halbold.
Good evening. My name is Jack Halbold. I'm a Larkspur resident and I'm a junior at Redwood High School. I want to thank the council for considering the adoption of the climate emergency resolution, which would make the city of Larkspur the 8th Marin government to do so. These past years and decades have made even more evident the terrifying effects climate change will inflict upon the world. A California resident simply has to breathe in the air during the fall to recognize climate change. Just a few weeks ago in chemistry, my class watched a PBS documentary investigating the recent camp fire that desolated the town of Paradise, demonstrating the destruction that these increasingly strong megafires are leaving across the West Coast. Similarly, a large lawn in the center of my high school, Redwood, is utterly dead, currently from Larkspur and California's perilous water shortage. These events, along with a multitude of scientific reports and other catastrophes, are more than enough reason to declare this city and more generally this world in a dire emergency. This is why I'm grateful that the Larkspur staff has retained the recitals of the draft CER roughly as submitted, though also troubled that some resolutions included within the draft submitted by Mr. Mueller were omitted. I urge the council to amend the resolution to include the imperative corrections that are identified by Mr. Mueller on behalf of the Larkspur Climate Group in a written comment for this meeting. These corrections, as past speakers have mentioned, regard a need for urgent action and assert that climate issues will be a high priority in the city's planning process, which without question they ought to be for the well-being of the city and my generation's future. Scientists often put dates like 2035 and 2050 as the crossroads for our climate. As a 16-year-old, I will be an adult at these moments when our world will face the most horrific natural catastrophes ever, unless people in power act now. When my generation and I will be adults, we will inherit a ruined planet because of the fatal inaction of past generations. This council can continue actively working to oppose the effects of climate change by passing this resolution with the recommended additions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack.
Next will be James Bell.
James? James, you're on
James,
mute.
I'll ask you to unmute.
Hi, James Bill, architect in Larkspur, living on Olive Avenue. And, there you go with Jack being, this young resident, and, what he's facing is just incredible. This is an emergency. It's all hands on deck. And, I think that a lot of what David Muller had suggested be reinstated should be reinstated. Urgent action needed. Yes, urgent action is needed. This is a simple statement. It's true. Have the staff do considerations of the impacts of different resolutions and how that impacts the climate is really important. That we think about this every day, and it's just all the other elements that David has suggested. I would really strongly urge you to reinstate those. Thank you very much, and thanks for all your work on this. Thanks for having this meeting, having at the last year and a half, considering this and working on it.
Okay, thanks, James, for those comments. We appreciate them. Next in the queue is Marilyn, right?
Yeah, it's Marilyn again, and living here in Mill Valley. And I too join everybody else in thanking you. I'm just so pleased you are considering this. I am part of the CER Marin Committee here, and we've been working on it now for quite some time. And the more cities, the better. The more entities, the better. But I just want to say, I know one of the city council people I definitely am in favor of David's reinsertions. I know one of the city council people in Fairfax and San Anselmo, sorry. And when they were considering adopting one, her argument to me of why they should is the people that are going to be following you. This is a document you have, it's on paper. They can read it. They can see all these additional things too. And definitely to me, this is our priority, and it definitely is an emergency. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marilyn.
I'm looking for any additional raised hands, and I'll note that the council received emailed comment for both items 8.1 and 8.2 that was read aloud. I won't read it aloud again, but it will be uploaded to the online agenda packet. And there is no further public comment.
Okay, good. Well, all of those comments were helpful and instructive and very much appreciated, I'm sure, by everyone on the council. So I'll bring it back to the council for any further comments, questions, or the undertaking of an action.
I'll move the staff recommendation, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, we have a motion, but I have a hand raised by Councilmember Paulson as well, unless you want to second it.
I had a quick question, Vice Mayor, if that's okay. I just wanted a clarification.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so, well, first, I also really wanted to thank all the people involved. It was really moving here, from Ms. Price, and Paray, and Mr. Bill, and that Redwood student, Mr. Hobble. My question is on, this goes back to the last meeting we had around the fifth resolved statement. And what Mr. Muller said doesn't seem to be my understanding of what staff recommended. So perhaps the city manager can clarify here. So, as I understand it, what the staff has suggested is that, any staff reports consider consistency not with two documents, but with one. So they consider consistency with the city climate action plan, which was an earlier, in the last business item. I wanted to ensure that our policy is the climate action plan, not, the emergency resolution. And I think that's what the staff is suggesting, is that the consideration would be against one item, not the other. It's not about the transparency or the rationalization or explanation of steps. It's merely what's the reference document. So perhaps the city manager can clarify or expand if I misunderstood something.
I think Mr. Muller's comments on that resolves are more about requiring, applying the requirement to staff reports. But I think to answer your question, the cap is the policy document, not this resolution. So staff takes its direction from the cap in terms of what the council wants us to try to achieve. So for me, the direction is appropriate to say we want the decision-making to be consistent with the cap. If you'd like, though, I will address Mr. Muller's comment.
Yes, please.
Because subsequent to Mr. Muller's submission that you considered, San Rafael passed their resolution, and I cut and pasted their language. And I think it's because our clever friends in San Rafael recognize that staff reports represent 10% or less of the decision-making that's relevant here to issues of climate. Most of these decisions are going to occur by the staff. And I think the San Rafael language is actually much broader than what has been passed in prior resolutions by other communities and places a much greater emphasis on the city's commitment to climate action plan and climate considerations in its decision making. So I didn't actually call San Rafael and ask them if that's what they were thinking, but I suspect that's the reason they broadened the language with that, rather than just focusing on staff reports. Because staff reports are only the things we've brought to the council, and a lot of the things that we do, once the cap's approved, we're just following the cap and doing it at a staff level. So, and you've required us to report out once a year about what we do at the staff level. So emphasizing for us that it should be consistent with these goals makes sense to me.
Okay, does that answer your question?
It does, and I wanted to make one last point. That is, many of the public and have mentioned the urgency and not to water down the fact that this is an urgent matter. And I think Resolution 6, saying that the council discuss this formally twice a year seems acceptable to me, because I think we've discussed parklets and other issues, quite frequently, and it is an emergency. And to me, that whether we use the word urgent or don't use the word urgent, the fact that we commit to more frequent meetings around this would really help ensure that it stays front and center as an issue for the city. So I just wanted to express support for Resolution 6, and on 5, I do believe we should be very clear that the cap is our policy document, and make sure the language doesn't interfere with that. Thank you.
And I think that is clear. And I just want to emphasize the title of this resolution is a resolution of the City Council of the City of Larkspur declaring a climate emergency. I don't know whether more needs to be said than that. So we do have a motion on the table. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
That was Councilmember Candell. Let's have a roll call.
Councilmember Candell,
Yes.
Councilmember Paulson,
Yes.
Councilmember Way,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Hilmer,
Yes.
Mayor Horoff.
Yes. So the motion passes, and I think that concludes that item. The resolution is adopted. So let me go back to my agenda. I think that concludes agenda item 8.2, and we will now move on to agenda item 8.3. And I appreciate the patience of everyone who have been waiting for the consideration of this agenda item to hang in here, because we're getting close to 9 o'clock. So with that, consideration of constructing permanent widened sidewalks on Magnolia Avenue from Kane Street to Ward Street as part of the Magnolia Avenue ADA project. That's the agenda item. Can we have a staff report? I see the PowerPoints being teed up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Julian Skinner, Public Works Director for the City of Larkspur. So tonight we have an item for you that's a follow-up of several public meetings and workshops that we've had over the last year, originating with the discussion of parklets in response to the pandemic, and then intertwined with the discussions of parklets we introduced the planned capital project to implement Americans with Disabilities Act improvements on Magnolia corridor in the same location where most of the parklets are. So at the last meeting, we came to you and had a discussion that mainly focused on the parklets. And there were some decisions made at that time. But as part of that conversation, we did talk about one of the aspects of the ADA project coming up, where we will be completely replacing all the sidewalk and asphalt on the two blocks of Magnolia between King and Ward. And that in designing that project, there was the possibility of making some revisions to the streetscape that may work hand in hand with some of the outdoor dining and retail and outdoor activity that have been increased due to COVID restrictions. And so at that meeting, we specifically talked about the opportunity to widen sidewalks on Magnolia to provide more public space, whether it be for outdoor dining or benches or seating or other outdoor uses. And the council asked us to return with more information. It was a concept, kind of a thought at the time of that workshop. And so we've done some research, we've worked with our engineer. And so we're coming back to you tonight with some more information that was requested as far as the feasibility and the costs of the potential widening of the sidewalks. So these are the questions that we posed at our last meeting. A lot of them were regarding parklets themselves, but as we drop down to the last question, we did discuss the upcoming ADA project and the opportunity to widen sidewalks to provide space for outdoor dining in lieu of parklets. And so that's the item we're going to focus on tonight. Here is the map of downtown with blocks showing where we have current parklets or outdoor encroachment permits issued to businesses. And so overlaid on that, we did discuss there are a couple of upcoming capital projects that have been in the works for some time, and there is some overlap with the area where we have parklets. The red outline here specifically shows the current ADA project. That's the focus of the direction we're looking for tonight. And then on the periphery of the ADA project, we are also planning on repaving Magnolia, which will touch some of the areas where we have other outdoor dining. So this is a board of one of the workshops we did where we posed all of these questions to residents and businesses about parklets and what they could or couldn't look like and uses for downtown. And pulling from that conversation, we had a couple of slides that showed this concept of a sidewalk bypass, and that led to discussions of this kind of looks like a widened sidewalk. We're about to renovate the 2 blocks of downtown Magnolia. Is this something we should look at doing permanently? Because if so, now is the time to do it. So here's a slide of the one block that we're going to focus on for this project. As I mentioned, the project will go from Ward to King, but we've looked at this with the engineer, and the only block that really makes sense for widening based on the configuration of businesses and the amount of or the lack of driveways would be the block from Ward to King. So that's what we've focused on. This is the exhibit that was presented at the last meeting. Schematically here, we've shown what at that time was the proposed ADA project, putting the sidewalk back in its current configuration and enhancing somewhat with some additional tree planting. And we've superimposed here's some schematics of cars to show where the parking is. And so conceptually, what we showed last time was the potential for widening the sidewalks. Essentially, now you have 10-foot sidewalks on both sides of the street. If we eliminated the parking on both sides of the street, that's a total of 19 spaces on this one block. You could gain 6 feet on both sides of the sidewalk, allowing for about a 16-foot sidewalk width. So allowing for a 5-foot passageway for travel on the sidewalk, that leaves about 11 feet of public space on the sidewalk. We did show another proposal that would remove parking only on one side of the street. So in this event, rather than gaining 6 feet of sidewalk on both sides, you would gain 3 feet on both sides, or 6 feet on one and none on the other, but a net gain on the block of 6 feet in width versus the 12 feet total you would gain if you did both sides. So can't widen the sidewalks as much with this, but you don't lose as many parking spaces either. And so this was the exhibit schematically that we showed, just kind of show the two different options. So the table at the bottom summarizes the resulting sidewalk widths and the parking space loss that would be associated with that. And so since the last meeting, we have worked with our engineer and the landscape architect. They've looked at the corridor, they've looked at all of the utilities to determine if it's feasible to widen the sidewalks, and then they did a cost estimate. And so these costs are somewhat different from the ballpark that we provided last time. This is after an engineering analysis. And so alternative one, which is doing the full parking removal and 6 feet extra of sidewalk in each side, adds about $140,000 to the project. The option of removing parking on one side is between $75,000 and $100,000. That varies depending on whether you split the sidewalk between the two sides or whether you just do the widening on one side. So those are the updated costs after the engineer and the landscape architect have looked at the corridor and done an evaluation of everything that would go into the widening. And they did provide some updated exhibits that are better than the cartoons that I provided last time. So again, we're looking at the block from Ward to Kane here at the top. And what you see here in the, I don't know what color you call that, muted green yellow color, that's the new sidewalk. The bright green boxes are where the tree wells and the new trees and we would preserve existing trees would be also. So this shows alternative one, which is adding 6 feet on both sides for a total sidewalk width. There's a little blow up on the bottom that shows one particular location, shows a 16-foot width, and then the tree well is roughly in the middle. So one of the other things that we were interested in was where would be the best place for the trees if we were to widen the sidewalk. Typically, you will see the trees further out towards the curb. In this particular instance, what we've landed with here is keeping the trees in the alignment they currently are, which lands them in the middle of the sidewalk. It's not a traditional layout, but we have significant underground utilities that are not all ours. We have some storm drains, but there's also gas and electric, AT&T, Comcast under the sidewalk. And moving the trees out of this current alignment to a more traditional location near the curb is very costly and not something that we would be able to implement with the current schedule we have for the project. So if we were to go with this scenario, we would have to widen the sidewalks and the trees would kind of be lined up in the middle. I think it still allows for flexible use of the space. Again, we're not trying to predetermine what uses will be on the sidewalk in the future. We're just looking at altering the canvas to use in the future, whether it be seating or outdoor dining. And you know, we've shown a couple of options before. If we want to talk about outdoor dining, where either we have the outdoor dining out by the curb, and then the passageway becomes between the outdoor dining and the restaurant or the building, or conversely, you can stack the outdoor dining close to the building and the entrance to the restaurant, and then have the passageway out near the curb. The tree location here doesn't really impact either one of those. In fact, I think it actually gives us more flexibility in determining whether, if there was a future use, if it was adjacent to the curb or adjacent to the building. So this is the updated drawing that shows what the new width would look like. And essentially, the pavement ends up being two 12-foot lanes for your traffic. And then you would not have any on-street parking within this block. And again, that's a loss of 19 parking spaces. Here are the other two options. We're calling them 2 and 3. They both remove parking from one side. And again, we could have alternates 4, 5, 6, and 7. There's varying alternatives of how you can do this, and which side of the street you could keep parking on, and whether you split the widened sidewalk between the two sides or just have it on the one side. For argument's sake, we chose to keep the parking, on the south or the east side of the street, because there's 11 parking spaces there as opposed to 8. So it reduces the parking loss. But an arrangement could be made where you would flip-flop this. And one thing to note here is if we were to go with this scenario where we split split the widening of the sidewalk between the two sides, but we keep parking on one side, then it actually shifts the center line of the street. So it looks a little awkward on this exhibit here, but it wouldn't really be noticeable to the public. And then the other thing we would have to coordinate with Marin Transit. There is a bus stop at the corner of Ward and Magnolia. And so we would have conversations with Marin Transit about what that bus stop would look like. And in one of these examples, we show that the bus would stop in the travel lane. And in the other example here, we show that we would still carve out a pullout for the bus so that when it stops, it doesn't block traffic. So that's a further detail we would have to work out if we landed on this scenario. And so I do want to...
May I ask a question? Dan Hilmer here. Julian, the reference to outdoor dining, my understanding is that widening the sidewalks, I guess on the only side that would benefit from it would be the side where Ruley is. There are so few restaurants in this block, and Ruley's only offers dining during the day. They would not be allowed, and neither would any of the properties on this block be allowed to add restaurants or expand dining beyond the daytime current condition because of the existing lack of parking. And that's embedded in the zoning for the area, and the requirement that each property provide on-site parking if they're going to bring in restaurant uses or expand existing restaurant uses. So I'm not sure that the widening of the sidewalks would really provide any benefit to any of the properties other than where Ruley exists. So I'm wondering, is the benefit we're trying to describe here actually not that much of a benefit to the businesses, because they really can't take advantage of it because we don't have a shared parking supply that would allow them to take advantage of the added sidewalk width, whether it be for outdoor dining or more restaurants.
Right. So these issues have been intertwined over the last year because we've been dealing with parklets, and now we're looking at the downtown ADA project. And I want to reiterate on this slide and the next that the widening of the sidewalk is not a commitment to having outdoor dining everywhere. It's true that there's only the one restaurant on this block now. I don't know what the corridor is going to look like 10 years from now or 15 years from now, but it's true that as far as outdoor dining for specific restaurants, it's a limited function of that block currently. So, but what I want to do is make sure that that we put out there that the widening of the sidewalk is not a commitment to having this outdoor dining everywhere. It's kind of like it's a canvas, it's a streetscape, it's altering that block for potential other uses. And, because of the parklets and because of COVID, I think a lot of those outdoor uses have been focused on the restaurant industry. And as you look at the slides here, obviously the top left is a location where a business has expanded out into a widened sidewalk, and it's essentially part of their dining area. As we've talked about parklets in the past, there are, policy issues moving forward, whether we're talking about parklets or widened sidewalks, to discuss, should spaces on the sidewalk be private, as the one on the left here is. It's clearly part of the restaurant. They have an awning with the business name on it, or they could be public spaces. You see the picture on the bottom right here is a widened sidewalk, and they've created benching and some light landscaping to enhance the corridor, but it's not associated with any one business. It's more of a streetscape change. And so that's, some other photos of what other cities have done with widened sidewalks is it's not necessarily a business per business evaluation as you go up and down the street. There are public amenities that can be placed in a widened sidewalk that you don't have as much opportunity for in a 10-foot sidewalk. This shows, a table with an integrated checkerboard. It shows some public expanded seating in a widened area that are not necessarily associated with a restaurant. And again, here's just some other examples of widened sidewalks that are not necessarily for an outdoor restaurant. And, we're not advocating at the side that we go and paint the sidewalk with a chessboard or that we pepper it with benches, as you see in the left photo. But these are just opportunities that would be available in the future for consideration if we've got that wider 16-foot sidewalk to work with versus 10. So I understand that, the parklets and the restaurants and those discussions have been commingled with the ADA project. And that's, to be honest, what prompted this discussion of the widened sidewalks, but it doesn't necessarily tie us into having outdoor dining everywhere up and down the street. If we were to move forward with a widened sidewalk, it does open up other opportunities. These are the follow-up questions that we had posed before. If we get into a parklet policy, all of these questions about public versus private use, and do we charge rent, and how big should they be? These would all be questions for a widened sidewalk too. How much of a widened sidewalk would we want to allow a restaurant to use, and would we charge rent? And how many benches should there be, and do we want outdoor activities on the street, or do we want to leave it available so retail can have some of their merchandise? So these would be follow-up questions that, we don't have, we're working with a time crunch, unfortunately, on the ADA project, right, where we want to construct this in the early part of 2022. And so the decision that needs to be made today is whether we widen the sidewalks or not. Policy decisions on what occurs within that widened sidewalk will follow, much like we're likely to have policy questions on parklets and what goes into parking spaces if we don't widen the sidewalks. So there's the two items are intertwined, but I'd like to focus on whether the council thinks that widening the sidewalk as part of this project is a good idea at this time. So we're basically looking for direction on the two options. Well, three options. The third option would be to put the sidewalks back in as they are. The other two options are some degree of sidewalk removal sidewalk widening and parking removal. And then I do also want to remind the council that we do have some outdoor dining uses that are outside of the ADA project. So that's also, it's not quite the same time crunch as the ADA project, but it is something that we would want to consider in the near future also is whether we would want to widen sidewalks outside of the ADA project when we go to pave those streets. So those are that's the feedback that we're looking for tonight. And again, here's your kind of the two outdoor uses. We've seen parklets, and then we've also got the photo on the left is an enhanced public space. So with that, this is the direction that we're looking for tonight, is specifically whether we should be widening the sidewalks with this project. So that's the conclusion of the presentation. I'm available for other questions.
Thank you, Julian. That was very helpful in terms of providing some clarity. Because when I look at this, at these proposals, particularly the possibility of widening the sidewalks on both sides, would create greater opportunities for a walkable environment, as well as opportunities for different businesses to use the exterior of their locations in ways that would accommodate that. So not to prejudge the outcome of this conversation, but I think it's a very helpful presentation and a conversation worth having. And I do want to emphasize what you have stressed a couple of times. Time is of the essence here, because we need to get on with this project. And I'm not sure when we need to be in a position where we have to let contracts. Maybe you could clarify that.
Yeah, so the as it is now, the engineer is working on a duplicate set of bid documents, one with a widened sidewalk and one with not. And we are looking to be at the first city council meeting in November. We would be bringing you plans for you to approve to go out to bid. So at that time, we would bring you the set of plans with the sidewalk as is, or some version of widening. So based on your direction tonight, we will have the architects and the engineers work on finalizing those plans to bring to you in November. And then we would ask for your approval so we could go out to bid. And then we will be back at your first council meeting in December, hopefully, to present you the bid results and ask you to award a contract such that in January we could start construction.
Right. So that just reinforces the point I was trying to make. There's some urgency in the council and the public coming to some resolution on the direction that we want to take here, because we will soon be coming up on a point where we do have to go through the contracting process, because that's just going to happen. Any other comments from the council?
Mr. Mayor, I have my hand up.
Okay. Sorry, you were off my screen. You're back on. Go ahead.
I have a question for planning. We have a downtown specific plan. That's the policy for the downtown. And that specific plan clearly connects the parking supply to the properties and the public improvements. What we're considering here is, and this is where I wanted to request that we include with the consideration of widening the sidewalks, that equally important in that consideration is removal of the parking spaces. And I'm going to include the parking spaces that are already lost due to the parklets that are there. The downtown specific plan connects all of these things and such that the implementation of that plan is the zone. Part of the implementation is the zoning that applies to the properties and the areas of the downtown where this is being proposed. And I just want to make sure that whatever decision we make here is consistent with the downtown specific plan and considers parking. And I saw that one of the last statements on the considerations in the slide Jillian showed was, should we be considering a parking analysis as part of this? And I think we have to, because otherwise we're taking actions where we don't really know what the economic impacts are going to be on the properties there. So I would hate to make these improvements and further reduce the range of uses or the ability for those properties to realize their real estate value by some of the actions we're taking, specifically removal of parking that's used to access the services in the downtown, especially by seniors.
So with that actually raises a couple of different topics that are worth a conversation, but one of them is actually kind of legal issue, whether any of the options that are being suggested here would create a legal or technical conflict with the existing planning for the downtown district. And I think I'm addressing that question to our city attorney. If you've had a chance to consider that, I mean, it is a relevant issue.
I have not had a chance, and I assume that if anybody had, it would have been included in the staff report, at least in any detail, and we'd need to consider that. But I suspect that the sidewalk widths themselves are not addressed in the downtown plan, and while there might be impacts on parking, a determination about whether or not any of these proposals is actually in conflict with that would depend not just on a reading of the document, but on some assessment of the actual of whether or not it's actually creating a constraint on parking within the entire downtown area.
Which kind of goes to Vice Mayor Helmer's point about the need to really have a good understanding of that. And I'm worried that we don't have a lot of time to make that assessment. Dan, you're on mute.
I'll just point out that in the downtown specific plan, the parking issue is identified as an existing deficiency that's currently constraining the properties from realizing their potential. So by worsening that parking situation, I don't see how we're gaining any ground with the overall improvements to the downtown by merely widening sidewalks and removing more parking without adding additional parking somewhere. I mean, just taking this step further restrains the downtown properties, in my opinion. So I think that's a negative impact.
And that's a very legitimate point. So I'm seeing a couple other hands being raised. Catherine, Way.
I have a few things, but and this conversation is interesting because we just spent an hour and a half talking about a climate emergency and a climate action plan, which fossil fuel burning is a huge cause of global climate change, but that's another point. My question is, several of them. First of all, Julian, what type of outreach has been done to the business owners and property owners directly, rather than the public workshops that were in the parking lot there? Have there been door-to-door outreach to the property owners?
Well, we've done mailings to property owners, and then we've also done some walks on the street where we've gone into the and talk to the business owners about the upcoming project and the not only the potential impacts of construction over the 3 months we'll be there, but also on some of these other issues that have come up with parklets and parking. And then we've been advertising with them these public meetings that are coming up and giving them an opportunity to hear what other folks have to say, and hoping they'll come out and provide their feedback. We have not done a property by property survey or tallied the pros and cons. We've heard both sides for enhancing the sidewalk, and also definitely heard the concern about parking.
Yeah, it's a 100-year-old corridor, and none of those buildings originally had any parking. It seemed like, except a few in the back. I mean, they didn't have designated parking for patrons other than street parking at the time. I'm sort of reflecting on how we've seen a similar change in utilization when the Bon Air Shopping Center underwent its refresh, and they added wide spaces on their sidewalk areas for multiple uses. And I've seen this in my hometown, where they did this in the 1970s and widened the sidewalks and created places for small kiosk businesses to put up, increase the seating areas. They often have pop-up merchants and art fairs and things like that. They added public art spaces and community gathering spaces. They put in water features where they could have a fountain and children's playground little structure areas. Now, I know we're a small 2-block corridor we're talking about, but I think it allows us to be creative in community spacing down there, by not just having it for parklet designed for restaurants only, but the design where it could be multiple uses that are community spaces. I sort of felt it at the wine walk the other day. It was packed with people, and everyone was saying how much they would like more places to gather, and not just in a construction parklet. But I'm still a little concerned. We need to do some outreach to the directly impacted businesses right there. And I'd like to get some of the data from them as to what their opinions are. We can't make the policy decisions on one particular owner because ownership changes, but really some of the key property owners who have been there a long time may have specific opinions on this. That's where I'm starting from.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And just a couple of reflections on that, because I appreciate everything that you've just said, and appreciate your reference to the wine stroll, because that was something that the Chamber of Commerce orchestrated, and it was extremely successful. But in talking to people who were participating in that event, one of the biggest complaints, not the only complaint, because everybody really kind of liked it, but one of the complaints was the lack of space to walk. A lot of people ended up being on the street. We didn't have the opportunity this time around. We'll have to revisit this next year, but we didn't have the opportunity to close the street off for that. But the lack of space for people to move around to take advantage of that event was a consistent complaint that I heard from people, because I was sitting there during the entire event and I had to listen to them. So I think that's a relevant consideration. In terms of engagement with businesses, and again on the chamber, I have highlighted the importance of businesses to be engaged on this issue, and mentioned it that we're having this meeting tonight. And I hope we have some representatives for the local business community here tonight to express their perspectives on what we're considering. That's it. I see Councilmember Paulson has his hand up.
Thank you, Mayor. I think Councilmember Kendall was ahead of me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's okay.
He's got a darker or a less clear hand up.
Okay.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I'll be brief. So I wanted to, I appreciate, all the comments ahead and kind of to go over what I see as the key points. I think, what Councilmember Way just described, kind of the point of climate as, not a central issue here, but relevant, and the issue of sort of the ability to walk and have that element of circulation. I think one thing that stands out in my mind is that we have an entire lot that we're still trying to deal with in Rose Lane, which could provide a lot of this, ambulatory and, mingling and outdoor type thing in a much broader and more appropriate way. So I kind of hold that as another consideration, for the future of Larkspur. And I do think that the parking deficiency is significant. And I don't think that, in San Francisco, often it seems reducing parking is one way for policy to reduce greenhouse gases. But, remember that those cars could be Teslas, those cars could be, purely electric. And, for all we know that, that element of circulation could turn into a bike lane. Once it's a sidewalk, it's no longer, it's that circulation element can no longer be vehicular. And I think that it's permanent, and it's also $140,000 from funds that was really, Measure B earmarked, for a different purpose. So I'm concerned about the parking deficiency, about the fact that as I walk that street almost every day, I don't see that there's a lack of space. When we do have a wine stroll, we can block off the entire street. We do that multiple times a year. But when the Lark Theater opens, I think we will have challenges in parking, and they're there now. So I'm, in the interest of time, also knowing that we don't have the input from the businesses, and we don't really have the input from the historical society, how that might impact things. I am, not in, generally not in favor of doing this.
Okay, thank you. That was pretty clear. Anyone else from the council? I'm sorry, Scott, go ahead. I bypassed you before. You're up now.
No worries. So my perspective is I think we have an unbelievably unique opportunity right now in that we are digging up the streets, we are digging up the sidewalks. If we are ever going to do this, now is the time to do it. I have a vision of Larkspur that is much more of a walking, pedestrian-friendly vision, that these sidewalks, if it were up to me, I would go from the Lark to Perry's and make this a much more just modern, updated, a city that would invite people to the downtown where there's lots of space, and we could be so creative with it. I agree with the parking issue. I'm disappointed that we're not having this conversation at the same time that we're having the parking conversation. We are developing Rose Lane. There's going to be a parking lot on Rose Lane. How many spots are there going to be there? Can we make up these 18 spots on the Rose Lane parking? There's a place across the street from Rose Lane that could potentially be parking. We were talking about meters as a way to enable the parking to flow, so you would have more people coming and going. There are lots of creative ways that we can deal with the parking. I think it should be dealt with together. I'm hesitant to approve the widened sidewalks without dealing with the parking. But given the fact that we have to pull the trigger one way or another on the sidewalks today, I feel that we as a council can creatively figure out how to make up those spots with all the potential options that are out there. And I have faith that we can do that. I'd be happy to have that conversation tonight. I don't know if we have time or if we even have the data, that if we can talk to staff about these other options and how far they've considered them as ways to replace those 18 spots. But I definitely think it's manageable if we just put our heads together and think of a creative way to do it.
And thank you for those those words and the reminder about time, because I'm noticing on my clock it's now almost 9:30. So we have, I'm sure, any number of people out in the public who would like to express their views on that, and we want to hear them. I'm gonna ask, unless there are other comments from the council. I don't see anybody else has a hand raised.
Just a
Yeah, Catherine.
question, and maybe Vice Mayor Dan Hilmer, since he's been around longer than. Has there ever been considered 90-degree nose-in parking on Locust Street, which is a very wide street behind St. Pat, next to St. Pat's? That I've never tallied the number of additional parking spots we can get there, but it's similar to how a lot of parking is done in San Francisco on wider streets. It's head-in parking. Has that ever been considered?
I don't know. I do know that the 18 spaces we're discussing on Magnolia are very, very valuable to senior citizens who would not be wanting to walk a block or more from a shared parking lot. Although having a parking district with shared resources is something we need to do too. I'm just saying we're headed down the wrong path here without considering the parking at the same time we're doing this.
And just to amplify that comment without prejudging the outcome of this conversation, it's important to keep in mind that our community is larger than just downtown Larkspur. I mean, I live in a part of the community where virtually no one can get to downtown Larkspur unless they get in a car and have to drive there, unless they're as athletic as our vice mayor is and rides his bicycle a lot. So the parking is an important consideration. But we're kind of confronted with the reality of time right now. So given that reality of time, unless there are further comments from the council, I'd like to open it up to the public.
But before we open it up, can I just ask staff, Julian or Dan, or whoever may have the data, do we have information on the number of spots we think are going to be created on Rose Lane, or the possibility of having parking across the street from Rose Lane, the perpendicular parking that Councilmember Way suggested, meters? I mean, have these been fleshed out at all that we can kind of have a conversation about them at the same time that we're discussing the sidewalks?
Now's the time.
The council decided to hold itself to its own standard for parking. So, Julian, remind me, it's 3 spaces per so many square feet. I'm forgetting what the number is, but I have in my head that the smaller scale project is at least 30 spaces have to go with it. And then at one time we were talking about as many as 60 spaces being on the Rose Lane property.
Hope that helps.
Just one more question, for Julian. In the current configuration of the parklets that we have put in the last 16 months, how many spaces have been removed with those current existing configuration? In this 2-block Kane to Ward section, it's about 9 spots.
No, it's I believe there are only 4. No, sorry, there are 5 spots within the footprint of the ADA project, and then there are another 6 spots that are just outside of the footprint of the project. So 5 and 6.
It would be an interesting question to see how much that has created a greater inconvenience for people.
Yeah, one of the issues with the parking is it's kind of like traffic studies since COVID. It's very hard to do a meaningful parking or traffic study because people's tendencies have been shifted, based on working at home and other things that go along with the pandemic. So, it's difficult for a future project to make plans based on any parking analysis you would do based on counts today.
Understood. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
I think a parking analysis would apply to
what the impacts would be on the downtown specific plan, including the economic impacts to the properties in the downtown. And then you look to the property owner and ask if those impacts are acceptable. Because they're going to be further constrained. Right now, they don't have any on-site parking, and the zoning ordinance requires on-site parking for them to realize their potential real estate value. So you're really putting the property owners in a bind here, and I don't think it's.
Well, no, we're not putting anyone in a bind at this point. We're just having a healthy conversation. So, but that's that point is well taken, and I think understood. And I see that our city manager has now put the clock back on in anticipation of us going to public comment. Although the clock has been set for 3 minutes for each comment, given the lateness of the hour, I'm going to encourage folks to go to 2, no more than that. So Dan, can you change that on the clock? Not 5. 2, that's it. So I'm going to exercise my discretion to keep things limited to that. And unless there's anything else from the council, I think it's time for us to open it up to the public.
Our first comment will come from Joan Lundstrom.
Good, Joan, welcome.
Thank you very much. I will note that our retail stores are clustered in one block right downtown. And the on-street parking would eliminate actually well-used pickup of the bank customers, they making automatic deposits, and lots of Rulix customers just picking up a cup of coffee. I wondered what the merchants thought. The merchants, not the property owners, but the merchants who own those stores. So I went this afternoon and I talked with 7 of the 12 merchants and a number of the long-term owners of those stores, and they are very upset. They said that, and I would like to actually, because I would like to relay to you what they said. So I'd like to use more than my 2 minutes because I'm quoting.
We'll give you a little bit more, Joan, but not much because we have other people in the queue.
Right. Not one of them knew about specifically today that the council was voting on a permanently widening sidewalks, which would permanently eliminate parking in front of their stores. And they were very unhappy with that they're not notified. Specifically, as merchants, each says parking is an ongoing major issue with customers regularly saying and complaining, quote, if we can't park downtown, we won't come. Quote, I'll go elsewhere as Nordstrom is nearby. One long-term store owner added, please talk to the council for all of us. Quote, we will go under if you do this. Another said, quote, this is unfair. We have not been given notice. We would like to voice our own opinion. And again, people are always complaining about parking. Another long-term store owner said, the city doesn't care about us. We don't need less parking. They all questioned what the $140,000 is for.
Joan, I think we've heard your message. So if you could possibly, because we are past the 2 minutes.
Okay, I was hoping to also, because I was quoting on behalf of the,
no, and I appreciate that, but
okay,
the business owners have been apprised of this meeting. I can guarantee you that.
Okay, I talked with our owners. Go talk with them yourself. And I'm even more upset. This is inequitable. It's a bad idea. Don't do this. Make this permanent move right now to eliminate all that parking.
Okay. Thank you, Joan. The message is heard loud and clear, and we appreciate it very much. Who's next in the queue? And let's start the clock again. And I am going to hold this to 2 minutes.
Good evening, members of the council. Eric Miller. I'm at 117 King Street, which is right across from St. Pat's. I strongly support alternative one, option one. Parking is a huge issue. It will be an issue, and it's going to be more of an issue as we go on. There is no parking outside my house because of the school and because of just all the traffic and all the businesses. And it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And we just can't design around our future around a car. We have a once in a lifetime opportunity to make Larkspur more pedestrian. And that's the future that we're looking at. We've had all these conversations about climate change, and yet one of the council members is advocating that we have to just stay the same and provide all the same parking. It isn't going to make a difference whether we have 15 less parking spaces or 15 more parking spaces. We have to switch to a different way of looking at this thing. So I urge you to go with the wider sidewalks. Let's make Larkspur more pedestrian, and the businesses are going to do better as a result of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric, and I appreciate your brevity. Who's next in the queue?
Next, we'll hear from James Holmes.
Okay.
James Holmes.
Dan's got to restart the clock though here.
Yeah. Hey, hello.
Yes, you're on. Go ahead.
Yeah, James Holmes, Larkspur. As a procedural matter, since Measure B tax proceeds would fund this project, the Measure B Oversight Committee should have had the opportunity to review the proposal, because the Measure B ordinance requires that the committee review and advise you regarding planned Measure B expenditures. I'm a member of that committee. I'm not speaking for it because there was no meeting held to form a position. However, I can tell you that using Measure B for bigger sidewalks would violate the council's written policy in resolution number 5717, which specifically says that Measure B money should be used for sidewalks only, quote, when deemed necessary or required by law. This project is neither. There are also many good reasons not to supersize the downtown sidewalks. In a nutshell, the 10-foot sidewalks are already adequate, while parking is inadequate, as city plans and studies have stated for decades. Hence, it is unwise to reduce the inadequate parking in order to supersize the already adequate sidewalks. The notion that somehow parking is less needed now is fantasy. It is also inequitable to supersize the sidewalks, and it's inequitable to take away spaces that can be used by drivers of all economic circumstances in order to make room for patrons and proprietors of pricey restaurants. It's inequitable to businesses other than restaurants who would have little business use for the expanded sidewalks. It's inequitable to nearby neighborhoods that would have to deal with the increased overflow, and it would be an inequitable gift of public property to turn public parking into private dining spaces.
Okay, thank you, James.
Many other things that could be said.
Yes, right.
All of these considerations.
Appreciate your comments, and I think we've heard you loud and clear. Let's go on to the next person in the queue.
Next, we'll hear from Larry Chu.
Larry, please go ahead.
Hi, good evening. I'll make it quick. You already have my letter, and I've made 4 key points there, and you've had plenty of discussion on it tonight. I'm just chiming in because there were some questions that came up that kind of went unanswered. The issue of perpendicular parking was not studied formally, but the Downtown Parking Committee, when I was on it, did have discussions about that when Hamid Shamsapur was the head of Public Works. We never came to any resolution, but always acknowledged that it was a possibility. On the issue of the Rose Lane parking, yes, City Manager Swartz is correct in saying that it would meet, what the council set out as being being in compliance with the parking requirements. And I believe it was like 3 spaces for every 1,000 square feet. And that's how they came out to like 60 spaces. So that's all I'm going to say at this point, if you haven't read my letter, please do so at your convenience. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
And I for one, have read your letter and appreciate your contribution as always, Larry. Who's next in the queue?
The council received emailed comments from Kathy Hartzell that I'll read aloud now. I have read what Larry Chu, Larry Langto, and Joan Lundstrom have written on the topic and agree with their observations and requests. I also learned today that of 7 local business owners on this part of Magnolia, not a single one was aware of the item on the agenda. Your outreach clearly has been inadequate. We are living under altered circumstances and happy for any opportunity for novelty, a way to enjoy dining out, seeing friends, etc. I'm on different sides of the issue for members of my family who happily hop on a bike or walk downtown and who vigorously support alternatives to driving a car. But some of us are dependent upon vehicles to get around as we age, and reducing our parking when we want our businesses to see customers to return, including the Lark, of course, means we need to look at a much bigger picture. Yours, Kathy Hartzell. And I'm looking for any additional raised hands or emailed comments. We do have a raised hand from Joan Lundstrom, who has been given an opportunity to speak.
Okay, Joan, please make it brief. Joan, you're muted.
I'm wearing my senior citizen hat and also as a caregiver. We cannot walk downtown, especially at night. We can't bike downtown. We happen to live in Murray Park, North Larkspur. This is really for all senior citizens trying to come to downtown does not give us any benefit whatsoever. I hope you take a really, really hard look at providing additional downtown parking, especially, and take a look. I now look for handicap parking spaces. And as long as you're going to do ADA, take another hard look at handicap parking spaces.
Okay, thanks very much, Joan. I hate to cut you off, but
I'm done.
We're getting close to 10 o'clock. I think we're done with public comment. Is there anything else in the public queue?
We had one more comment from Lilia Langto.
Okay. Go ahead.
Ask her to unmute now.
Actually, I'm sorry. Actually, it's Larry Alonso. I'm using my wife's computer. I mean, it's a joint computer. I'll be very brief. I sent a letter. Other people have apparently read it. I'm going to say no more about it. I hope you have. There's one thing I omitted. I'll be very brief, and that is the proposal to have a widened sidewalk between on Ward Street between Magnolia and Cove. That, I think, is a very bad idea. At the time that Rose Lane was developed, there was discussion about having an entrance to the Rose Lane project off of Ward Street, and the city decided that that was not an appropriate thing, but they did leave an emergency exit with 3 ballards at the end of the east, what they call East Ward Street. We call it Ward Street, but anyway. So my point is simply this. At that time, and I don't have the statistics to give you, Ward Street is very, very narrow, and the idea of expanding the sidewalk would make it a dangerous place, in my view. So I think you ought to look at that carefully before doing anything. And with that, I will return to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Larry. And we did get your letter, and I read it, and I'm sure others on the council read it as well. It's certainly been circulated, and we appreciate your input. Anyone else in the public?
I'm looking for any final raised hands or emailed comments. And there is no further public comment.
Okay, good. Well, again, looking at the clock, it's now 9:44, and I'll bring it back to the council for discussion and whatever appropriate action is required. Any further comments from the council? Catherine Way.
Excuse me. I think a lot of really important things have been said by the public and by our council members tonight. I think this is still, I know we're in a sense that we definitely have a deadline coming up, but I still think we need a little bit more outreach by official outreach to that block of businesses. I think what Ms. Lundstrom presented to us was a survey that she had conducted, but I'd feel more comfortable with a real official approach to those business owners for their opinion. At the same time, I think Eric Miller's comment that we can't design around the car is something we need to keep first. And I think we need to keep always in our mind, while recognizing we have an older population that is dependent on vehicular transport to get around. I understand that. But at the same time, Councilmember Candell brought up the unique opportunity this is to reimagine a public space. So balancing all of those things, I'm not ready to make a decision tonight. My suggestion is in the next 2 weeks before our next meeting, we definitely get more of clarity from the downtown business owners as to their opinion on this matter. Not that it will be the vetoing ability, but I think it would help create more support and buy-in if we knew where they were standing on this officially. But they get a voice, but ultimately the decision has to be made by us as a policy that's best for the entire community, not just the 7 owners that were surveyed earlier. So that's kind of where I am now. I don't know where that fits in with the Public Works timeline, if we can push it 2 more weeks. But
let's get to that here quickly. Yeah. But before I offer the opportunity for other council members to speak, which they need to have, I do chafe a little bit at the suggestion that the business community has not been, there has not been outreach, because there has been. There has been outreach directly from the city. And as I mentioned, I've reached out to the Chamber of Commerce and made it very clear that that outreach needs to be conducted within the business community itself as well. So I'm not going to suggest that we shouldn't take some additional time here. And I would actually ask our city manager or our public works director, how much flexibility do we have in terms of engaging in a further process before we have to pull the trigger on this project?
Well, Julian's definitely on a clock now to do a bid for the ADA improvements. So I'll let him speak to exactly what that timeline is. I do want to note, though, and maybe this will come up in further discussion, I don't think additional visits to business owners is the constraint. The constraint is the information that Vice Mayor Hilmer's asked about. That's a pretty intense study. That can't be done in a couple of weeks. So I suspect if Vice Mayor Hilmer was going to revisit some of his points from earlier, I'd be asked this question then, and that would be what I would let you know.
Could I ask through the mayor?
Before we get to that, I think the city manager was inviting our public works director to provide a little additional clarity on our timeline here.
Yeah, I apologize. My internet is going in and out, so I'm unfortunately missing key bits here and there. Hopefully you can hear me now.
Yes.
But essentially the timetable that we're working on now that I described before, which involves coming back at the first meeting in November and the first meeting in December with follow-up actions on this project, is geared around starting construction the first week of January. And that's based on 2 factors. One is we are under a legal settlement agreement to complete these ADA improvements. These are the last 2 blocks that remain to be done, and we're definitely up against that deadline. And then the other is, in our previous outreach with the downtown businesses, they had indicated that a January through March was their ideal construction window as far as the least disruption possible to their business. So anything that gets moved out now to subsequent council meetings is going to push the window of this project and is going to push us out of that ideal January to March construction window.
Right. So that was my understanding as well. And I think it's important for everyone on the council to appreciate that. But I will ask the question because it's been raised. If tonight is the drop dead deadline for us to make a decision that provides you the sufficient guidance that you need in order to move forward with your legal obligations and contractual needs, that would be helpful to know. If we have a week or two flexibility still, that would be helpful to know as well. And I'm not really sure I care what the answer to that question really is, but I'd like to hear some input from that.
So I would say best case scenario is any delay between a decision tonight and a future meeting. The best case scenario is you just take that time frame, whether it's 2 weeks or 4 weeks, and you push back the beginning of construction by that same window. We do have that, you know, the time schedule that's set up now takes into account the days that we typically will open bids, the day that we need to review that information and get the information into the city clerk for the council agenda. As we move forward, we may miss a critical date here or there, and 2 weeks may turn into 3 weeks or 4 weeks. So we're also coming up on, you know, the holiday break, which can play havoc with, you know, the availability of our consultants and to do certain things, and it may push us into a window where we lose another couple of weeks because some activity is over a holiday break. So I would say the best case scenario is any delay now, you're pushing back the beginning of the project by that same amount of time. But that could be amplified depending on where the dates fall. And I haven't looked at a schedule where I don't get council direction till the next meeting and see how the council meetings align with days that we typically open bids and things like that to see if that 2 weeks stretches into 3 weeks or 4 weeks.
So I guess part of the reason I asked the question is we do have some flexibility in our own scheduling as well if we need it. And you know, if we have to schedule a special meeting to make a final decision on this, we have the ability to do that. I would rather not do that, but if that is something that would be necessary to address some of the comments we've heard tonight, and not create an undue burden on our contracting schedule, I'd be happy to understand that. If it turns out that it would basically mess us up if we didn't take that opportunity, I'd like to understand that as well. And as I said, I don't really have a strong view one way or the other.
I'd like to make a motion, Mr. Mayor.
I have a question, if I may.
Yeah, I saw Scott beat you to it, so he gets to go first. Go ahead.
My question to staff is, if we were to put this over for 2 weeks, would staff be able to prepare something regarding parking? And I think that's the issue here is really the parking. Something so that we could see a vision of alternative parking, whether it's, you know, the Rose Lane parking, the across the street parking, the perpendicular parking, the metered parking. You know, it's just something that we can say, hey, if we do this, there's an alternative way for us to make up those spots or to allow the same number of people to be able to come and go through downtown Larkspur. Maybe it's even a shuttle bus. I don't know what it is. It just feels like there are so many options that we're not considering right now, that if we were to put this over for 2 weeks, maybe staff could come back and say, hey, here's some potential ways to make up those spots that we're going to be losing.
Yeah, I think 2 weeks is too tight of a window to have a meaningful parking analysis. We've definitely looked at the low-hanging fruit. We've definitely taken another look at Locust. I wish I had 19 parking spaces in my back pocket to offer you, but I don't. The issue is, as you look at parking, you're not just looking to grab a space here and there. You're looking at parking policies. You're looking at things like shared parking, and then you're having a community conversation about, does additional parking at Rose Lane, how does that relate to the loss of parking on Magnolia Avenue? This is not a shopping mall where you have rows and rows of parking and you park at the first place you can. This is, the parking spaces that are directly on Magnolia have an added value because they're directly in front of the businesses. And I don't think we can do a proper analysis in 2 weeks, because it's more than just trying to find a parking space here or there. It's looking at different parking sharing options and where different locations of parking may be and how feasible that is, and how the public and how the businesses are going to see that parking is equivalent to lost parking on Magnolia. So I would say even a month to come up with some meaningful information on parking is a stretch.
And from what we've otherwise heard today, I don't think we have the luxury of time to do that. So I think our Vice Mayor was prepared to make a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just given the uncertainties about parking, I think the only responsible thing to do is to move forward with the ADA project without widening the sidewalks and protecting the parking that we have. The current downtown specific plan identifies that the downtown is currently underparked, and it was open-ended as to how that was going to be solved in this downtown specific plan, leaving open the idea of discussing things such as parking districts, which we have not done. So that's just even to bring all the properties into compliance of some sort with their own parking needs relative to their zoning. So my motion is to move forward with the ADA project as designed without widening the sidewalks, so that we can keep on track with the timing and minimize disruptions to the businesses with that project.
Okay, so is that a sufficiently clear motion, City Manager, for us to take action tonight?
I believe the Vice Mayor Helmer's motion is to select the alternative, to select the original ADA proposal and not one of the other alternatives that would widen portions of the sidewalk.
And Mr. Mayor, if I wanted to make a counter motion, would you like me to wait till we vote on this motion first?
I think it would be appropriate to consider Vice Mayor Helmer's motion first, and if it does not get approved, then we can consider other things. So we have a motion on the table from Dan Helmer. Do we have a second?
I second.
Okay, Councilmember Paulson seconds the motion. So can we have a roll call?
Councilmember Candell,
Yeah, considering the unique opportunity, which I think is not going to come back this generation, I'm going to vote no.
Okay.
Councilmember Paulson,
Yes.
Councilmember Way,
No.
Vice Mayor Helmer,
Yes.
Mayor Hara.
Yes. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Allison, but I think the motion passes.
That is correct. The motion passes 3-2.
And I believe we're supposed to note for the record when there's a split vote that the votes in opposition were from Council Members Candell and Way.
Fair enough. So is there anything further we need on this this item? Go back to my agenda here. So I think we have now concluded agenda item 8.3 with that vote. So thank you for all your participation and engagement in the issue, and thanks in particular for members of the public who have hung in there with us as we've gone through this process. And I'll ask as a point of order for our city manager, I'm looking at the clock, it's 9:59. Do we need a motion to extend the meeting beyond 10 o'clock?
I think it's 10:30.
Is it 10:30? I thought it was
Yeah.
10. Okay, all right. Then I think we're in good shape because I don't think the next item is going to take that long. So
no, I don't think so either.
I don't either. So concluding 8.3, we're going to go on to 8.4, which is authorizing a teleconference meetings in compliance with Assembly Bill 361, as we have been doing already forever and ever and ever, and may never stop. So can we have a staff report, please?
Well, Mr. Mayor, the governor by executive order authorized, essentially modified the Brown Act to allow for the types of meetings we've been holding. And there was an expiration date, which is the end of this month. And so the legislature decided to extend the opportunity to councils and other boards and commissions out there to continue to conduct teleconference and video conference meetings with those provisions of the Brown Act suspended. And most notably, we're talking about having to post your location and invite people in to wherever you are, since the logic is they have the ability to participate in the online environment with you. Being the legislature, they decided to take what was actually a really nice, clean, simple executive order and make it unnecessarily complicated. So you will have to pass a resolution saying that the emergency is still in existence, and then you'll need to revisit the decision every 30 days. So
that's
I will
helpful.
make a motion that the emergency is still in existence and that teleconference meetings in compliance with Assembly Bill 361 should be approved.
Well, we have a motion on the table, but as a matter of order, I want to give everyone on the council to have an opportunity to say their views.
And I just want to clarify that the motion is to approve the resolution.
I think that's right. And just as a clarification, do we need to make any additional findings, or is just adopting the resolution?
The resolution makes all the findings for you.
Yeah, that's what
thank
I thought.
Thank you to Mr. Woodruff.
I will change my motion to adopt the resolution.
Okay. Are there any comments from council?
I'll second the motion.
Okay.
I have a question after we take the vote then of city manager.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second, so that is teed up, but I do want to give the public an opportunity to provide a comment on this item. Allison, is there anyone there?
I'm looking for any raised hands from our audience members or emailed public comment. And there's no public comment.
Good. So we have a motion and we have a second. I will be doing this every month, I guess, for now on, but that's fine. So I guess we'll call a roll call.
Councilmember Kandel.
Yes.
Councilmember Paulson.
Yes.
Councilmember Way.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Hilmer.
Yes.
Mayor Harrell.
Yes. So the motion is approved, and that concludes consideration of agenda item 8.4. And that brings us to agenda item number 9, which is adjournment.
I think Vice Mayor Hilmer had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just a quick question. Should the council decide we don't need to have a meeting and there's more than 30 days between meetings, would that necessitate the calling of a special meeting to
That's a good question.
in compliance with this resolution?
I would say that the way the statute is written, the clearest thing to do would be to call a special meeting within 30 days. However, what it says is that the council has to reconsider the findings every 30 days. And so the idea is you adopt the resolution, you can hold meetings without reconsidering the findings for 30 days, and then you have to reconsider them. If 30 days elapsed, there's nothing in the statute that says you can't go through the whole process again and consider the issue and determine that there's still a basis for holding teleconference meetings. So I don't think it precludes it But I think the safest thing to do would be to hold a meeting every 30 days.
So as
So we
a
actually have to-
follow-up question, can I just ask our city attorney, is there a way that we can manage this administratively through a determination by the mayor or the vice mayor together or whatever, so that we don't have to convene a meeting just so that we can have a meeting?
The way the statute is written, I don't think that there is the ability to delegate the authority to anyone other than the city council.
Okay, well, that answers my question.
Yeah, but I do think that if 30 days elapsed and it wasn't possible to call a special meeting, for example, that the city council could basically adopt another resolution at its next regular meeting. And I don't think that that's really going to create a meaningful issue under the Brown Act.
And if we have to do that, do we have to formally convene a meeting, or can we just do that electronically by asking members of the council to consider it and exercise their vote in that manner?
It actually needs to be done at a meeting.
Okay, all right. So you've answered
Mr.
both
Mayor,
my questions. Vice Mayor Hilmer.
Sky is the act we're taking. We're actually making the finding and doing that every 30 days.
That's correct.
Yep. That's the resolution. We just have to do that again.
This is to Dan's point that the legislature decided to make something that was fairly straightforward, kind of absurdly complicated.
Yeah. There you go.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
Have a good night, everybody.
So, well, no, I need a motion to adjourn. So are you going to make that motion?
Sure. Motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second? We have a second from Councilmember Way, and by consensus, we are adjourned. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Have a good night.